Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christys, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Well, a very good afternoon, everybody. Patrick Christys here with you from 3 until 6 p.m. Here's what's on the menu in the first hour. We react to the Conservative Party's latest attempt to stop the small boats crisis. It centres around being able to deport more people and put a cap on the number of refugees we accept every single year. Labour, very angry about the whole thing, but I'm joined by Conservative MP Tim Loughton, who's going to tell us, frankly, why we should all be rather happy about it. I'm also going to be joined by former chairman of the Conservative Party, Sir Jake Berry, who wants Matt Hancock dragged back to Parliament to account for the allegation that he held disabled children to ransom in order to secure votes for his lockdowns. I will also be asking, how much money do you have to earn before you lose the right to strike? Because supposedly NHS consultants are about to go on strike and they earn between £80,000 and £130,000 a year. Any sympathy for them? No, not really. And of course, it's very nearly that time of year again, isn't it? Eurovision, everybody. Get the tinsel out, your sparkly dresses, whatever you do. I'm going to be talking to a lady who's waited over a decade to try and get her hands on those famous tickets and see her beloved Eurovision. Was she successful? Well, you'll have to find out. I've got it all for you, ladies and gentlemen. Let's get stuck in. OK, so email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, and let me know if we do put a cap on the number of refugees allowed into Britain every single year, what should that number be? gbviews@gbnews.uk. But right now, it's your headlines.
Good afternoon, I'm Tamsin Roberts in the GB Newsroom. Here's the latest. Well, we can start with some breaking news in this last hour. The London Fire Brigade says a child has died after a fire broke out in a flat in Barking this morning. 2 adults and 2 children were also taken to hospital. 6 fire engines and around 40 firefighters were at the scene, but the cause of the blaze is still under investigation. So that breaking news just in, the London Fire Brigade saying that a child has died after a fire in a flat in Barking this morning. The Home Secretary has told MPs that it would betray British voters not to tackle the waves of illegal migrants breaching the border. Speaking in the House of Commons, Suella Braverman's outlined details of the new illegal migration bill, which would remove and ban people who entered the UK illegally.
This bill enables detention of illegal arrivals without bail or judicial review within the first 28 days of detention until they can be removed. It puts a duty on the Home Secretary to remove illegal entrants and will radically narrow the number of challenges and appeals that can suspend removal. Only those under 18, medically unfit to fly, or at a real risk of serious and irreversible harm, an exceedingly high bar in the country we are removing them to, will be able to delay their removal. Any other claims will be heard remotely after removal.
Stuart MacDonald from the Scottish National Party says no asylum seekers are illegal.
We believe that all who seek asylum and seek refugee status deserve a fair hearing. We are 100% behind the clear statement from the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees that there is no such thing as an illegal asylum seeker. Mr Speaker, despite the dreary dog whistle rhetoric, her bill will not so much as lay a solitary finger on people smugglers or people traffickers, but it will cause serious and devastating harm for people who have already endured incredible suffering.
Leaked WhatsApp messages suggest former Health Secretary Matt Hancock considered withholding funding for a learning disability centre to pressure an MP to back new COVID restrictions. The messages obtained by the Daily Telegraph show Mr Hancock and an aide had discussed warning MP James Daly that the centre would be off the table if he rebelled. A spokesperson for Matt Hancock says what is being accused never happened and that the leaked message exchange is only a partial account of the conversation. The trial of the man accused of murdering Olivia Pratt-Korbel has heard that she was shot after running downstairs, screaming to her mother that she was scared. 9-year-old Olivia died after a gunman fired into her home in Liverpool last August. Manchester Crown Court has been told that the suspect, Thomas Cashman, had been lying in wait for his intended target on the evening of the shooting. He denies murder. The gender pay gap in the UK has widened, with men now paid 14.4% more than women. The accountancy firm PwC's report puts the increase down to a sharp rise in childcare costs, which has priced many women out of work altogether. It's warned at the rate the pay gap is closing, it will now take more than 50 years to reach gender pay parity. Cancer Research UK estimates around 75,000 GP appointments would be freed up every month if people stop smoking in England. The charity says smoking remains the biggest cause of cancer-related deaths and is urging the government to do more to prevent young people from picking up the habit and to help current smokers quit. Thousands of UK travellers have been hit by the disruption caused by a general strike in France. Dozens of flights and trains were cancelled and ferries were delayed due to French workers walking out in protest at President Macron's plan to raise the pension age from 62 to 64. The King and Queen Consort are in Colchester to celebrate its new city status. Colchester was awarded the city title during the Queen's Platinum Jubilee celebrations last year. The couple were due to visit the city's zoo and castle, as well as Colchester Library, where they'll join charities Age UK and the Silver Line for tea with local volunteers. This is GB News. More from me shortly. Now, back to Patrick.
Enough is enough. We must stop the boats. That is the message from the Home Secretary today. Suella Braverman unveiled plans to detain almost all asylum seekers who arrive on small boats before deporting them to a safe third country. Speaking in the House of Commons, she outlined the scale of the problem, saying it was costing Britain around £3 billion a year.
Let's be clear, they are coming here. We've seen a 500% increase in small boats crossings in 2 years. And this, Mr. Speaker, is the crucial point of this bill. They will not stop coming here until the world knows that if you enter Britain illegally, you will be detained and swiftly removed. Removed back to your country if it's safe, or to a safe country, a safe third country like Rwanda. And that is precisely what this bill will do. That is how we will stop the boats.
Well, tough talk from the Home Secretary, but critics of the bill say it would flout international law and would be at odds with Britain's obligations under the European Convention on Human Rights. And frankly, we've heard a lot of this before, haven't we? Well, earlier on, speaking to GB News, the former Brexit Secretary David Davis pointed out how other countries deal with illegal migration.
Most countries in Europe, apart from France and Italy, I think, most countries in Europe have a zero acceptance rate for Albanian refugees. And France, I mean, France has many, many more than we do and turns down 90-something% of them. We accept 55. You know, that's where these things start. You can declare a country a safe country, right? Then you can create a law which allows you to turn around like that No appeals, nothing. Now, why do I say that? Because Sweden have already done it. Sweden, you know, social democratic, civilised, you know, nice, upright Sweden has done it. And how did they do it? They looked at the international courts, which is why this is all funny in the papers this morning. They looked at the international court case law and designed their law around it. And if we just copied Sweden's law, we could guarantee that the European Court of Human Rights wouldn't interfere.
OK, well, there we go. Our Home and Security editor, Mark White, joins us from outside the Home Office now. Mark, thank you very much. I understand that, really, this centres around being able to deport more people and then putting a cap on refugees going forward. What else is there?
Yes, well, that, I mean, is key to it. They want to get the number of asylum seekers in the system at the moment reduced very significantly to get rid of that backlog. Once they're at that stage, once they've very significantly reduced the backlog, then they'll look at a cap, so an annual figure for the number of refugees that the UK will accept, and there will be the introduction of more safe and legal routes, according to the government, and indeed there will be a reaction, as they have done in the past, to world events. So if you have a war like Ukraine or the fall of Afghanistan to the Taliban, then you have the possibility of a safe and legal route from that particular country to help with those who want to claim refugee status. So that's the theory anyway. The difficulty will be really getting those third-party agreements in place and through the courts to ensure that the likes of Rwanda, other countries that we're told, like Rwanda, that are interested in partnering with the UK to take some of these asylum seekers, to ensure that they are all up and running. Otherwise, the whole process really falls down before it's even begun, because then you're relying on returning people to their home countries. But if you've got a country like Iran, there is no agreement with Iran. There is no agreement with Afghanistan. These people cannot be returned to those countries. So then you need that third party like Rwanda or another country involved in this. So, as I say, as a matter of urgency now, the government really needs the Rwanda policy to get final approval in the courts, but it's still being litigated, and every time it finds in favour of the government, as it has done previously, then there is a further appeal. And we have probably still many months to go, Patrick, before we are at a position where Rwanda is finally settled one way or the other.
Yeah, indeed. Look, Mark, thank you very, very much. Mark White there, our Home and Security editor outside the Home Office. I'm going to bring in now Tim Loughton, who's a member of the Home Affairs Select Committee. He actually spoke, I believe, immediately after Yvette Cooper in the Commons earlier on. He joins us now from Westminster. Tim, look, thank you very much. Great to have you on the show. One thing that stood out for me was something that Suella Braverman said about 100 million people essentially ready and waiting to come here under our current laws and rules and regs. Is that true?
Well, I think if you look at what's going on globally, and if you look at big displacements which are happening in Africa, where there are millions of refugees living outside of their own country, and also the prospect of climate change having a big impact on people moving away from unviable economies closer to the equator, in the future there is substantial numbers of people who are on the move. So we've got to make sure that we have a robust system, that we've got the appropriate people genuinely fleeing danger and persecution who we can offer safe haven to in the UK, and that we're not having our generosity completely abused by people gaming the system who are coming in because they're economic migrants and not genuine asylum seekers, as is happening at the moment, I'm afraid.
What countries do we currently have returns agreements with?
Well, we have returns agreements with countries like Albania, but not enough are being sent back to Albania swiftly enough, because the whole court appeals procedure drags it on for months and in some cases years. That's just crazy. We need more returns agreements with a wider range of countries as well. But there are some countries who just will not take back any people who've left their country and applied for asylum elsewhere, particularly Iran. And that doesn't just apply to UK, it applies to France, other European countries as well. So we've got to have a shared solution to how we deal with people like they don't have a case to come to the UK.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think it will come as a massive surprise to people to know that there are several countries out there who don't particularly want to accept people back, and I think people will be very sympathetic towards that. But I am keen to drill down a bit on where we already have returns agreements with. So Albania, that doesn't appear to be working. Well, where else do we currently have these agreements? Because if it's not really anywhere, we're going to have to go and get them, and I don't quite understand how we do that.
Well, we did have returns agreements with the EU. So if you look at the last year when we were full members of the EU, under the Dublin Convention, which governs the way people come to within the EU and apply for asylum, we endeavoured to return just over 8,500 people to EU countries from where they had come, under EU law, they should have taken them back. They actually took back 102. It was less than 1.5%. So those returns agreements with the EU itself were not actually working, even in those heady days where we were full members of the EU. So we need to have arrangements with countries like Rwanda, and the Home Office is looking at other countries potentially to have arrangements like Rwanda, where people can be transferred and their asylum claims will be assessed there. And if they don't want to end up in Rwanda or other countries that have been designated, then you shouldn't come across the channel. This is just for people coming across the channel. Yeah. The most dangerous, the most inappropriate way of trying to get into the UK. Whatever your views is on what asylum seekers or not we should be taking, that's the problem. The growing and dangerous...
Can you understand, though, Tim? Can you understand, though, Tim, why people might be slightly dubious about this actually working now? Because it does rely on us getting new returns agreements with countries that we previously had agreements with that weren't being adhered to anyway, and then being able to deport people to countries like Rwanda without coming out of the legal framework that is currently stopping us taking people to Rwanda. So I think people might be thinking, this doesn't work.
It relies on a number of things. First, it relies on having a scheme where we can transfer people to places like Rwanda. So if they choose to come across the channel in a boat, it will be a lottery as to whether they end up in a hotel in Kent or whether they end up on a plane back to Rwanda. But we also need to have a proper deterrent. When we announced the Rwanda scheme, I was in Calais with the Home Affairs Select Committee a few weeks ago. I mentioned this again this morning in the House of Commons. When we announced the Rwanda scheme, there was a big surge in migrants in France who've been trying to get to the UK, approached the French authorities to say, how can we stay in France because we don't want to risk going to Rwanda? So that message got out. That was a very real deterrent effect. The problem is that no planes have yet taken off, so that scheme is not seen as a deterrent at the moment. With the measures within this legislation, which say you will not get asylum claims granted if you come across the channel in that way, and you will not be allowed to come back to the UK again in the future, that is a very strong message. Don't try and get across the channel in a boat. There are other safe and legal routes which are an important part of this bill today, which if they do have a genuine asylum claim, that's what they should use, not coming across paying money to people smugglers.
Yes, and I know you feel quite strongly about the fact that you don't believe that Labour have particularly got a plan and that they are shouting this down.
Plan.
I think, in your view,
absolutely no plan whatsoever, and it's a completely dishonest to try and say to the public, oh, Labour's got a plan about this. The only thing they've mentioned is about better law enforcement. Well, great, but we're already subsidising the French police force to the tune of £53 million a year. They're intercepting more people, but more people are trying to get across, and the French do not arrest them. Okay. So surprise, surprise, they come back the following night with a new boat and try again. That is not the solution.
OK, Tim, thank you very, very much. Tim Lardton there, who is a member of the Home Affairs Select Committee, just reacting to what we heard in the House of Commons a little earlier on, Suella Braverman unveiling the Conservative Party's latest attempt to try to stop the small boats crisis. There are massive issues with it, though, of course, as we've just addressed there, such as we do have to get more return agreements with countries who possibly don't want to have those return agreements with us, and we do have to be able to get planes taking off the ground to deport people, despite being in an existing legal framework that wants to stop us doing that. So, yes, trouble at mill, ladies and gentlemen. But moving on, we have lots more on the illegal immigration, but now to Matt Hancock's leaked WhatsApp messages because, and this is quite a specific one, this, Conservative MP James Daly says he is appalled and disgusted by these latest revelations. Now, it's suggested that Matt Hancock discussed withholding funding for a learning disability centre in Daly's constituency of Bury North, a red wall seat, to pressure him to not rebel against the COVID restrictions. Now, with me now is Sir Jake Berry, who's the Conservative MP for Rosendale and Darwen, former, of course, chairman of the Conservative Party. Now, Jake, thank you very, very much. You are very angry about all of this because, on paper, it looks as though Matt Hancock was holding disabled children to ransom to get his COVID rules and regs through. Is that right or fair?
Well, I think a fair-minded sort of person would conclude that from the messages as we've seen them. I know Matt Hancock says that doesn't accurately reflect the picture that was going on at the time. But look, I've been in Parliament for 13 years. I'm more than aware that sort of arm twisting and wrangling takes place in the corridors of the House of Commons in terms of parliamentary business. But I do think that if proved to be correct, and I've got no reason to see why, if someone messages back saying 100% yes in terms of a proposal, that it wouldn't be correct. If proved to be correct, I think this has crossed the line. I don't think it's acceptable as a father of a child with additional needs myself and actually being adjoining the constituency of James Daly in Bury North. I think this is completely wrong, and that's why I've called for Matt Hancock to be dragged or brought in front of the House of Commons so we can cross-question him on this very issue.
Did you vote for those particular measures?
I did support largely the government measures in relation to tiering. I was quite critical of them at the time, and I've been named as one of the red list bad MPs who was giving them a hard time about it. And that wasn't because I wanted to give the government a hard time. It was because
just out of interest, Jake, sorry, but would you have voted for them if you'd have known that this kind of quote-unquote bully boy tactic was being used to get other MPs to vote for them?
Well, I just think, if proven to be correct, this is absolutely appalling. It is weaponising money for disabled young people in the northwest of England as a way of bullying people into voting for the tiering system in the northwest. Lots of northwest MPs, including me, had real reservations about this. Let's not forget that as soon as the tiering system was proposed in London, suddenly the government came forward with money for hospitality, which hadn't been available in the north of England. So I don't think anyone can criticise northern MPs, whatever party they're from, for standing up for the people they represent. And this, if correct, is absolutely appalling, showing that a good Secretary of State was prepared to use the plight of disabled children as a way of forcing through their will against MPs raising legitimate concerns. I've not experienced anything like this in politics. I personally think this is completely unacceptable.
The instalment of WhatsApp messages appears to show that Matt Hancock did not do everything that he possibly could to preserve life in care homes, did not do everything he possibly could to preserve young children's education, and now quite possibly did not do everything that he possibly could have done to help disabled children. I mean, at what point does it turn into looking quite evil?
Well, that would be for others to say, but I do think the great disadvantage we have is that the COVID inquiry, which is probably several years away from a conclusion, won't, give us the answers that we're seeking in any reasonable time frame. And that's why I'm calling for, following this mass leak of 100,000 text messages, for us to get on with examining the evidence such as we know it is. And if Matt Hancock believes that he has in some way been misrepresented through his own words or through his own messages, then surely he will come forward and justify his behaviour. But until I'm shown to the contrary, I think this sort of bully boy tactics is absolutely unacceptable. And, I think shows Matt Hancock in an appalling light. And let's not forget that whatever the reasoning may be, this new Centre for Disabled Children to Learn in has not been built and has not been funded. Now, we don't know why that is, but James Daly did vote against these tiers, and surprise, surprise, the centre doesn't appear and doesn't get funded. Now, I don't know why that is, and I'd be very interested to hear from Matt Hancock whether he followed through on what appears to be a threat made by a special advisor in these messages.
So in your view, Matt Hancock needs to return to Parliament immediately and be asked this directly. That question being, is the reason why there is not a centre for children with learning disabilities in the seat of Bury North anything to do with the fact that the sitting MP for that seat did not vote for your measures?
Correct. And that's why I put in a tweet last night that there is a fairly arcane procedure where members of Parliament can be drawn, and other people actually, the last time it happened was in the last century to a journalist, can be drawn to the bar of the House of Commons and asked questions by members of Parliament. There is no other way, as far as I'm aware, for ordinary MPs who aren't on select committees to hold him to account for these messages. He's no longer a Conservative MP. He's no longer a serving government minister. And that's why I hope that this arcane procedure, which we haven't used this century, maybe something the Speaker looks to bring back to enable these questions to be answered.
I know you've got to go in a second, so just one more very, very quick one. If indeed it turns out that that is the reason why there isn't a centre for children with learning disabilities there, I mean, what kind of punishment should he face?
Well, there is very limited punishment that he can face, but I'm sure that the viewers of GB News, Britain's national news channel, will ensure that in the court of public opinion, even if he never faces any other court, he loses.
Look, thank you very much for fitting us in. I know you're a busy man. We really appreciate your time. That's Sir Jake Berry there, who's the Conservative MP for Rosendale and Darwin, and, of course, the former chairman of the Conservative Party. Now, Matt Hancock's spokesman said this: as we've repeatedly seen this last week, it is completely wrong to take this entirely partial account and write it up as fact. What's being accused here never happened. So there you go, pretty categorical from Matt Hancock's camp. Coming up, after a very, very short break, I'm going to return to our top story by speaking to a human rights lawyer. Now, all of this latest immigration plan can only happen if we can get around the law. I want answers. I want solutions, not problems. Can we get around the law? See you in 2.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not
believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit off.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
Is the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I'm going to give you a reminder of some key points on how the government is proposing to deal with illegal migrants. These were unveiled earlier in the House of Commons. Now, under the proposals, those arriving on small boats will be detained for 28 days without bail or judicial review. They'll be prevented from using modern slavery laws to oppose the government's decision to deport them. There'll be an annual cap on the number of people entering via safe routes, which are to be set by Parliament. And only those who are under 18 at risk or medically unfit to fly will be able to lodge and appeal deportation. Look, this has come under fire. A lot of people are saying that this doesn't actually comply with the current laws that we have. Suella Braverman could only muster that some of the country's finest legal minds are working on this at the moment, and she wouldn't get drawn into a more robust outline of the legal framework. Shoaib Khan joins me now. He's a human rights lawyer. Thank you very much, Shoaib. A lot of people are very sceptical about the legalities of this. I'm going to bring you in now and ask you how you think, if at all, we are going to be able to actually comply with the law that exists at the moment and still do what Suella Braverman actually wants us to do, which is, let's be honest with you, deport more people and put a cap on the number of refugees. Is Shoaib there for us? Does not appear to be. Yes, he is. There you go, Shoaib. I hope you heard all of that. Crack on.
Yeah, so I'm not sure it can be done. And I think one reason for that is, I mean, obviously, other than the specific provisions in the bill, but obviously, I mean, I think they basically accepted it because, as was in the newspapers today and as she confirmed in Parliament, they themselves are not able to confirm that they understand this law will be compliant with the ECHR or our existing human rights laws. So, I mean, obviously, numerous times, dozens of times over the past decade, Greece have insisted a particular law or a proposed bill is in compliance with human rights law, and later it's found not to be. But in this case, even the government itself is saying it's doubtful that it will be compliant. So I don't think that they can do this.
Now, what is interesting is that Suella Braverman did quite clearly say that these laws were designed for a time that is not compatible with the modern crisis that we're seeing, which implies that there's going to have to be some kind of new laws. What new laws could those be in order to get what she wants, which is basically more deportations to third countries, also returns agreements with existing safe countries, and our ability to put a cap on the amount of refugees we accept every single year?
I mean, so the laws would be, I mean, like one of the MPs today, who's been in Parliament since 2015, said, it seems to be the fifth Tory Immigration Act we've seen since then. So, I mean, obviously, they're coming up with new laws all the time. But the point is, I mean, other than how much it costs us and the counterproductiveness of it, how many of them actually comply with international law? So that's the thing. I mean, if they're just talking about domestic law itself, then obviously Parliament can make any law.
Let's talk about that international law, Shoaib. Now, what are the consequences of us breaking international law? Because is it just that people abroad might sneer at us and that it's not the done thing, or is there some kind of more significant consequence, like our Home Secretary gets locked up?
So I think in terms of more significant, I mean, I think that's significant enough as it is. So, for instance, obviously, as has said many times, obviously after the Russian aggression recently, Russia was suspended from the ECHR or kicked out, basically. And there's been no other country that's happened to. So for us to have to join that group, I think would be pretty damning and shameful in itself. But other than that, it's just, I mean, obviously, you just lose other countries' respect. Other countries don't engage in legal treaties with you. They won't want to have relations with you when they know you don't comply with your obligations. So, I mean, I think, I mean, yes, I mean, it's unlikely that the Home Secretary would be locked up. But I think that even the consequences I spoke of are pretty damning, really.
OK, I'm just reading here now. Now, this is from February 2020, but this is the countries with the highest number of ECHR judgments that they've decided to just ignore. OK, and we've got Azerbaijan, Russia, as you've mentioned, no longer a part of it, Hungary, Ukraine, Turkey. Those are 63% for Turkey, 67% for Ukraine, for example. I mean, even Germany here, that according to the list that I'm listening to, the top of the rankings of the most disciplined countries, Germany ignored 17% of the ECHR's judgment, and that's Germany, and they're regarded as a pretty straightforward country. France and Norway, 18%. I mean, why can't we just be like that?
Well, there's a number of reasons for those statistics mainly. But firstly, the main thing is that the UK is in fact found to be in breach very, very rarely. So I think in the whole of last year, there were only 2 judgments against the UK. So that's the first thing, that the court doesn't really usually find against the government. So, I mean, if there's only 2 judgments a year and then the country decides to even ignore those, then obviously I think that's pretty appalling behavior, really. So that's the one thing, regardless of what the government pretends about, the ECHR judges interfering in every small thing they're trying to do. In fact, ECHR interference is very minimal in British laws and politics. But firstly, then secondly, obviously, I think it's not just a matter of ignoring, but especially as we talk about Turkey and other countries, the main problem there is the very slow implementation or enforcement of those judgments. Yeah. I mean,
we are currently amongst the most disciplined countries. Again, these are just the figures that I'm reading here, which is that we only apparently don't implement around 9% of those. So we do have some wiggle room there, and we could maybe argue we're facing exceptional circumstances and a massive burden to the taxpayer. Do you not think? Just quickly, Shoaib.
I don't think so necessarily, and the point is that we're not, because if we even look at the number of asylum seekers in Germany, that's 3, 4, 5, 6 times the number that we take. France, Germany, Italy, Greece, everyone takes many, many more asylum seekers than we do. So obviously those are the countries that have an emergency, not us.
OK. All right, Shoaib, look, thank you very much. Shoaib Khan there, who's a human rights lawyer, just reacting to whether or not, essentially, we will be allowed to flout international law and what that would mean. There's loads more still to come between now and 4 p.m. A survey of NHS consultants shows a growing support for strike action, saying they want a pay rise. But on average, supposedly, they're paid around 120 grand a year. Should public workers who earn that amount of money be able to strike? And there's been a mad scramble for tickets to see the Eurovision Song Contest live shows in Liverpool. They sold out in just 36 minutes. I'll be speaking to one fan, find out whether or not they missed out on tickets. But right now, it's your headlines with Tamsin Roberts.
Patrick, thank you. It's 3:35. Here's the latest from the GB newsroom. The Home Secretary's told MPs that it would betray British voters not to tackle the waves of illegal migrants breaching the border. Speaking in the House of Commons, Suella Braverman outlined details of the new illegal migration bill, which would remove and ban people who enter the UK illegally.
This bill enables detention of illegal arrivals without bail or judicial review within the first 28 days of detention until they can be removed. It puts a duty on the Home Secretary to remove illegal entrants and will radically narrow the number of challenges and appeals that can suspend removal. Only those under 18, medically unfit to fly, or at a real risk of serious and irreversible harm, an exceedingly high bar in the country we are removing them to, will be able to delay their removal. Any other claims will be heard remotely after removal.
Leaked WhatsApp messages suggest former Health Secretary Matt Hancock considered withholding funding for a learning disability centre to pressure an MP to back new COVID restrictions. The messages obtained by the Daily Telegraph showed Mr Hancock and an aide had discussed warning MP James Daly that the centre would be off the table if he rebelled. A spokesperson for Mr Hancock says what is being accused never happened. A court has heard how Olivia Pratt-Korbel was shot after running downstairs, screaming to her mother that she was scared. 9-year-old Olivia died after a gunman fired into her home in Liverpool last August. Manchester Crown Court has been told that the suspect, Thomas Cashman, had been lying in wait for his intended target on the evening of the shooting. He denies murder. The gender pay gap in the UK has widened, with men now paid 14.4% more than women. The accountancy firm PwC's report puts the increase down to a sharp rise in childcare costs, which has priced many women out of work altogether. It's warned at the rate the pay gap is closing, it will now take more than 50 years to reach gender pay parity. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Now, back to Patrick.
Well, loads of you have been getting in touch with your thoughts on Suella Braverman unveiling plans to detain almost all asylum seekers who arrive on small boats before deporting them to a safe third country like Rwanda. Leslie says, Britain is a small island. Our country is struggling in many areas. Why should our own people keep suffering to house criminals who choose to take the illegal route into Britain? France is the stumbling block. It's about time Britain toughened up. One more now. David says, clearly they do not look for safe countries, but look for the ones with the best benefits. So they are clearly economic migrants, not those seeking safety. Stop the support and benefits for illegal asylum seekers and see how many people will look elsewhere. So those are some of your views there. Keep those coming in, gbviews@gbnews.uk. But I'm moving away from the old migration stuff. And when I come back, I'm asking whether or not NHS consultants, many of whom earn over £100,000 a year, should be allowed to go on strike. It's pretty straightforward. At what point, how rich do you have to be, basically? How rich do you have to be before you lose the right to strike? I will see you in 2.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference. And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit off.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
OK, welcome back. Now, the British Medical Association is reporting that NHS consultants are ready to strike after a consultative ballot showed support for strike action. So they've consulted the consultants. The association warned that it will proceed to a formal ballot unless the government takes action to meet the pay demands by the 3rd of April. So what could an NHS consultant strike actually mean for our health service? And do they really have the right to strike, given the fact that they earn an average, according to reports, of around £120,000 a year? With me now is Dr Mike Barnes, who is a consultant neurologist. Thank you very much, Dr Mike. Do you think that consultants have the right to strike? They sound quite rich.
Pleasure.
Should they strike?
Yeah, I don't think the actual level of income is relevant to striking. I think this country has fought for the right to strike over 100 plus years, and I think it's important for any group to have the right to strike. Right. Now, I realise that most strikes are about low-paid workers, but of course they are, and probably in the community there's probably less sympathy for higher-paid workers, but they can be equally aggrieved about their terms and conditions of service, their pension rights, and I think they deserve a right to strike.
OK, I'm just looking at an article here in the Telegraph which says that NHS consultants were paid around £1 million for their work during test and trace. So the idea may be that they suffered at the hands of the coronavirus crisis, which is being used, of course, by people like paramedics and nurses who are much lower down the pay scale than consultants. Possibly doesn't stack up for consultants. So what's so bad about the pay?
Well, I think this, well, it's not a strike as yet. It's a consultation that might lead to a strike if the government doesn't listen. But it's not just about pay. It is about pay. But the two other main issues that I think the country ought to be worried about is the pension, to start with. There's many consultants now in their 50s who find it much more financially attractive for them to go part-time or simply retire. The level of people leaving the NHS at consultant level has tripled since 2008. Now, that's got to be worrying for the country because we're losing good quality consultants who are at the peak of their abilities and they're drifting off either to retire or into the private sector unnecessarily because of the pension difficulties they're facing. The government can do something about that. They did that for judges. They can do it for doctors. So it's not just about pay.
What is the pension?
The pension varies according to how much you've been paid over the course of your working life. So, again, it can be generous. But the point I'm making is that consultants are leaving at a time when the NHS needs more consultants. Many are leaving because of the ridiculous situation with their pensions. We need to get that right, and then hopefully more consultants
percentage of their salary, what percentage of their salary is a pension? Because people in the private sector, for example, quite often maybe have about a 3% salary pension, OK? But in the public sector, quite often it's 20-odd%, and I think people would regard that as quite generous. I'm just trying to understand why the taxpayer should be made to pay for people who've been on 100 grand a year plus for a considerable amount of their working lives.
Yeah, I take the point, and there's many people across the political spectrum that agree with you. But my personal...
No. All right, we'll try and reload him up. But there we go. That was Dr. Mike Barnes. Hopefully we can get him back on. But yes, just to fill you in. So some of the facts and figures about this initial ballot to see if we can strike as a consultant. They've consulted the consultants. Around 86% of the 17,000 senior hospital doctors consultants that were balloted said that they wanted to strike. That was a 61% turnout. Look, I suspect that there is possibly limited sympathy for people out, which in case you couldn't tell was what I was going at there, for people who maybe earn an average of around £120,000 a year. I understand, of course, there is a cost of living crisis, but I do wonder whether or not the taxpayer would feel that it was just use of their money to go and increase the pensions and increase the pay rises for people who have, frankly, been on quite a decent amount of money for a very long time. And we've also had emails coming in on this, gbviews@gbnews.uk. Look, here we go. Yes, absolutely. Peter's been on to say, no, I have absolutely no sympathy for the consultants. They do a great job, but I don't think that they are deserving of a pay rise at this particular moment in time. Yes, and rather a lot of this coming your way as well. NHS consultants, Patrick, my consultant maybe earns 100 grand a year for 2 days a week in the NHS hospital and works in 2 of the private hospitals during the week as well. That's from John Andrews. I just wonder, when it comes to the consultants, could you make the case that they're potentially taking advantage of an already beleaguered NHS and potentially holding patients to ransom by saying, well, we will leave or go on strike? A lot of people, to be fair, in whatever line of work you're in, don't necessarily have the option to just retire or just go and work a few days a week. I believe that Dr. Mike is back again. Dr. Mike, thank you very much. Apologies about that. Yes, I believe you were answering why the taxpayer should fork out for people who are on 100 grand a year plus to have a better pension.
But my emphasis was on the keeping doctors in the NHS. We all know that at the moment there are real crises in the NHS. Look at the striking nurses, the striking ambulance drivers. We need to keep people in the NHS when there's a huge need for those doctors to be there. We need them to stay. And in my view, the pension is one reason they're leaving, so let's put the pension right so they can stay and help people in the NHS. The other thing is that the doctors were always, and other groups were always subject to independent pay review. That was an independent body who sat down and said, what is a fair rate of pay for this group? That was fine. Everyone accepted that. But now, recently, the government has been interfering with those recommendations. And I think all the doctors want is the review of the pension and review of the independent pay body.
Are they holding, at a time when nurses, paramedics, ambulance drivers, NHS call handlers who maybe earn an average of around 30 grand a year are going on strike because they are, in some cases, saying that they are struggling between heating and eating. I am relatively sceptical about the old food banks argument, but that keeps being made about them going to food banks, etc. With respect, consultants are not feeling the pinch when it comes to the cost of living crisis in anything like the nurses that our TV viewers will be able to see on picket lines there. And, maybe, surely, if they cared that much about the NHS, they would actually maybe even forego a pay rise and give that to nurses, wouldn't they?
I think I understand that argument entirely, and I have great sympathy with it. But nevertheless, at a time when the NHS is clearly in crisis, and that's unarguable, we need to keep the good senior
So
doctors
they're holding patients
there.
to ransom, Dr. Mike, are they? This is the thing that I find it difficult to get. If the NHS wasn't in crisis now, would consultants really be asking for a pay rise and a better pension? No, is the answer. And they are doing it because they see a window of opportunity. And is that not bad for patients' care?
Well, if that was true, it would be bad for patients' care. I would like to differ that they're not taking advantage of the timing. I mean, look at all the staff, ambulance staff, nursing staff, junior doctors as well, we shouldn't forget, are all reflecting the fact that the NHS is in a bit of a poor shape at the moment and they need to do something about it. I don't think, generally speaking, the doctors are taking advantage of the situation.
All right. Would you be going on strike, Dr. Mike?
No, because I've retired.
Oh, fair enough. That would make a lot of sense. Yeah, we might need you back in. There you go. Look, thank you very much. Dr. Mike, look, I really enjoyed that back and forth. Thank you very much, Dr. Mike Barnes, who's a former consultant neurologist. There you go. Anyway, right, OK. But now we're moving on. Now, this is very much a gear change, this, ladies and gentlemen, a very deeply distressing and serious story, because the trial of the man accused of murdering 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Korbel has got underway today. Olivia was shot inside her home in Liverpool last August, and Thomas Cashman is charged with murder. I'm going to go live now to Manchester Crown Court, where our North West reporter, Sophie Reaper, is. Sophie, thank you very much. What's the latest, please?
Well, Patrick, this afternoon, prosecutor began telling the jury about what crime scene investigators had found at the house of Olivia Pratt-Korbel that night back in August of last year. They were shown an image of a bullet lodged in the front door, and they were also had one of the shots described to them. Now, that shot went through the front door, it went through Cheryl Corbell's wrist and went through Olivia Pratt-Korbel's chest. That would be the bullet that ultimately proved fatal to the 9-year-old. The jury were also shown some images of clothing that was recovered from 2 separate addresses. One was a pair of navy blue tracksuit bottoms. They were recovered at the house where the prosecution believed Thomas Cashman fled to after the incident. A further 2 items were then recovered from Thomas Cashman's sister's house, the matching navy blue tracksuit jacket to those tracksuit bottoms and a T-shirt. The jury were told that after forensic analysis, Thomas Cashman's blood had been found in the T-shirt and that gunshot residue that matched to the scene of the crime had been found in the tracksuit bottoms. They were finally told about the circumstances of Thomas Cashman's original arrest back on the 4th of September of last year. He was interviewed that day when he denied any involvement. He said, "I've got no involvement at all in any of these crimes that you're putting forward towards me. Nothing whatsoever. I live in the area, brought up in the area. Whatever the reasons, I've been round the area, but I haven't committed no offence." Mr McLaughlin then concluded the opening statements for the prosecution, telling the jury that it's their job to keep emotion out of their deliberations, and instead it's their job to, based on the evidence that they are given, to determine whether or not the gunman in this incident was Thomas Cashman. Now, court has concluded for the day. It's going to resume tomorrow morning, and we're going to be bringing you updates on this court case as we get them over the next few weeks.
Yes, indeed. Sophie, look, thank you very much for bringing us that. That's Sophie Reaper, of course, who's been outside Manchester Crown Court for us in the latest of that trial in the case of Olivia Pratt-Korbel. Right, we're moving on from that now, ladies and gentlemen, because they went like hotcakes. Yes, sold out in just 36 minutes. That's right. Fans of the Eurovision Song Contest were desperate to get their hands on the hottest ticket in town to see the nine live shows. Oh, anyway, you learn something new every day. In Liverpool in May, around 6,000 were up for grabs for each show. But it wasn't plain sailing for those queuing online, with lots of fans reporting error messages. And there's been outrage at this for everybody who apparently wants to go and see the 9 Eurovision shows. You can't have too much of a good thing, apparently. Well, I'm joined by one of the fans who missed out. It's Emma Richardson. I mean, can I just say, what's immediately obvious to me, Emma, is that you have fabulous hair specifically designed for Eurovision. I mean, it is remarkable stuff. Well done. You should get a ticket based on that alone, actually. It matches my tie. Anyway, right, so you missed out. You missed out.
I did. Yeah.
What was it like? What was it like when you were trying to get on and get your tickets and stuff?
It was awful. So myself and my best mate had 3 appliances where we were all on Ticketmaster trying to get on, kept coming up with an error message. So then we'd have to reboot it and start all over again. And then it said join the waiting room. And then from the waiting room was a waiting list. And then from the waiting list was the queue. And then the queue was to buy. And it was endless. And it would say 2,000. But then what would happen is you would then get chucked out of that. So then you'd have to restart the process all over again. So I think myself and my best mate were on for an hour and 45 minutes. So the fact that you said it was sold out within 36 minutes,
yeah.
We still sat there for over an hour trying to get them. So, yeah.
Well, why do you care so much about Eurovision? What is it for you that it does it for you?
It's tradition now. I mean, I've been watching this since, my mum and my nana in the 70s, you know, going back to Brotherhood of Man. And it's an annual competition that we've just celebrated, and that's continued with my family. And now my best mate comes round. So, you know, we have food from the countries, more or less alcoholic drinks if we can, try and dress up, you know, and just make a full celebration. And I have to tell you, my family don't know this, but last year it was a family do. And I said I couldn't go because I was poorly.
Oh my God. You are aware that you are now live on national television, aren't you?
I know, I'll probably get messages after this going, I thought you were ill. Well, I was. So I tried to make myself feel better by watching Eurovision.
Oh,
so,
there you go. Well, what are you going to be doing this time? I didn't realise there were 9 shows. I mean, of goodness gracious me. So you haven't been able to get a ticket for any of them. There's got to be another way you can get a ticket. Can we put a plea out now, actually, to anybody who's watching this, who's got a ticket, OK, and should clearly give it to them? Go on, what would you say to someone who's watching this now who's got a ticket?
Oh, I am desperate, absolutely desperate. The last time I had it was 25 years ago, and I couldn't get tickets for that when I was in Birmingham. And if it's another 25 years, I'll probably be dead. So I would just like one opportunity. I mean, we weren't even bidding for the final show. We were happy to just participate in any. So we didn't go for the grand final because we knew that tickets are going to be extortionate. I mean, it was £500 for one ticket, and it's just, no. So on resale alone, we're never going to get there. So our only opportunity might be tickets, which would be nearer the occasion. But other than that, there's nowhere. And yeah, very disappointed.
All right, well, good luck. You know, you seem like a positive person. You seem like you're full of life. I think there's every chance that something might just come your way, hopefully. So hopefully there's some kind soul out there who's watching this.
That would be amazing.
Yes,
that would be absolutely amazing. If
anyone's got a spare ticket, you can email us here, and we obviously have your details because we've managed to get in touch with you. So if we do manage to get in touch with anyone, then we'll make sure we send it your way. Just one very quick one. Can I just see, is there a happy birthday banner behind you there somewhere?
Yes, so that's mine and my son's. We share our birthday. He was 10 and I was 21 again.
When? Yesterday?
Yesterday.
Oh, well, happy birthday. Happy birthday to you and your son as well. And, of course, you look far too young to have a 10-year-old son. There we go. Emma, thank you very, very much. All right, good luck. Emma Richardson there, who is a Eurovision mega fan from Manchester. You love to see it. Now, after the break, we will have the full story after Home Secretary Suella Braverman revealed the government's plans to end the illegal migration crisis. We'll hear from Braverman and get the verdict of a senior Conservative MP. I will see you very shortly, ladies and gentlemen. Just remember as well, I want you to email in gbviews@gbnews.uk. This plan centres around, essentially, deporting more people and also, as well, putting a cap on the number of refugees. So gbviews@gbnews.uk. See you after the break.
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison? I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Yes, OK, Patrick Christys here with you on GB News. Here is what I've got coming your way this hour. We are, of course, leading with the government's latest attempt to stop the small boats crisis. Essentially, two main points for them. They want to deport more people and put a cap on the amount of refugees that we accept every single year. Labour are quite angry about it. The Tories, understandably, saying that we should all be very happy about it. I am also going to be discussing the latest revelations from Matt Hancock. He has been accused of holding disabled children to ransom in order to get MPs to vote for his lockdown measures. They are saying that's shameful and he should be quite literally dragged back to Parliament. In other news, though, as well, the police essentially have been accused of racism. Why? Well, because supposedly, anyway, they tend to find more white people quicker than missing ethnic minorities. What's really going on there? And a slightly different one, I think, to finish this hour, ladies and gentlemen. It looks as though the baby boomers are at it like rabbits. That's right. Apparently, casual sex is booming with the boomers. Who knew? Anyway, all of that coming your way and much, much more. Lock yourselves in. Yeah, keep your emails coming in, ladies and gents. gbviews@gbnews.uk. I want to know from you, if we do put a cap on the amount of refugees we accept as a nation every single year, what should that number be? gbviews@gbnews.uk. But right now, it's your headlines with the wonderful Polly Middlehurst.
Patrick, thank you, and good evening to you. Our top story on GB News today, the Prime Minister says the initiatives to tackle illegal migration have started to bear fruit and need to be implemented on a larger scale. Visiting a Home Office Joint Control Centre in Dover, Rishi Sunak told staff the plans to prevent small boat crossings need to have a deterrent effect. The Prime Minister was shown a surveillance drone and taken into a van used to monitor movements at sea. In the House of Commons, the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, meanwhile, outlined details of the new illegal migration bill, which would remove and ban people who enter the UK illegally.
This bill enables detention of illegal arrivals without bail or judicial review within the first 28 days of detention until they can be removed. It puts a duty on the Home Secretary to remove illegal entrants and will radically narrow the number of challenges and appeals that can suspend removal. Only those under 18, medically unfit to fly, or at a real risk of serious and irreversible harm, an exceedingly high bar in the country we are removing them to, will be able to delay their removal. Any other claims will be heard remotely after removal.
Now, more leaked WhatsApp messages suggest the former Health Secretary Matt Hancock considered withholding funding for a learning disability centre in order to pressure an MP into backing new COVID restrictions. The messages obtained by the Daily Telegraph show Mr Hancock and an aide had discussed warning the MP James Daly that the centre would be off the table if he rebelled. A spokesperson for Matt Hancock says what is being alleged never happened and the leaked message exchange is only a partial account of the conversation. Now, as you've been hearing, the trial of the man accused of murdering Olivia Pratt-Korbel has heard that she was shot after running downstairs, screaming to her mum that she was scared. 9-year-old Olivia died after a gunman fired into her home in Liverpool last August. Manchester Crown Court has been told that the suspect, Thomas Cashman, had been lying in wait for his intended target on the evening of the shooting. He denies murder. The gender pay gap in the UK has widened, with men now paid 14.4% more than women. The accountancy firm PwC's report puts the increase down to a sharp rise in childcare costs, which has priced many women out of work altogether. It's warned at the rate the pay gap is closing, it'll now take more than 50 years to reach gender pay parity. Thousands of UK travellers have been hit by disruption caused by a general strike in France. Dozens of flights and trains have been cancelled and ferries have been delayed. French workers are walking out in protest at President Macron's plan to raise the pension age from 62 to 64. And here, Cancer Research UK estimates around 75,000 GP appointments would be freed up every month if people stopped smoking in England. The charity says smoking remains the biggest cause of cancer-related deaths and is urging the government to do more to prevent young people from picking up the habit and to help current smokers quit. But Simon Clark, director of the smokers group Forest, asks where the line will be drawn.
Smoking-related issues tend to be multifactorial. In other words, they could be caused by a whole range of issues that may have nothing whatsoever to do with their smoking. I mean, there's obviously another group of people, of which I'm a member, which are people who are obese. So is the next step going to be to try and end obesity so that we save thousands more GP appointments?
Now, parts of northern England and Scotland have been blanketed in pure white snow at the start of a cold spell, with temperatures forecast to drop to -15 in some parts of the country. More than 4 inches of snow have fallen in northern Scotland and around 8 inches are forecast for later this week. Tonight is expected to be the coldest night of the year, with snow warnings remaining in place until the weekend. And just lastly, the King and Queen Consort are in Colchester to celebrate its new city status. Colchester was awarded the city title during the Queen's Platinum Jubilee celebrations last year. The couple are due to visit the city zoo and castle, as well as Colchester's library, where they'll join charities Age UK and the Silver Line for tea with local volunteers. We'll bring you details of that later, no doubt. But in the meantime, back to Patrick.
OK, so there has been some tough talking by the Home Secretary today in spelling out how the government plans to crack down on people illegally crossing the Channel to enter the UK. Suella Braverman unveiled plans to detain almost all asylum seekers who arrive on small boats before deporting them to a safe third country. Speaking in the House of Commons, she outlined the scale of the problem, saying that it was costing Britain around £3 billion a year.
Let's be clear, they are coming here. We've seen a 500% increase in small boats crossings in 2 years. And this, Mr. Speaker, is the crucial point of this bill. They will not stop coming here until the world knows that if you enter Britain illegally, you will be detained and swiftly removed. Removed back to your country if it's safe, or to a safe country, a safe third country like Rwanda. And that is precisely what this bill will do. That is how we will stop the boats.
Well, there we go. But critics of the bill say that it would flout international law and would be at odds with Britain's obligations under the European Convention on Human Rights. Well, earlier on, speaking to GB News, the former Brexit Secretary David Davis pointed out how other countries deal with illegal migration.
Most countries in Europe, apart from France and Italy, I think, most countries in Europe have a zero acceptance rate for Albanian refugees. And France, I mean, France has many, many more than we do and turns down 90-something% of them. We accept 55. You know, that's where these things start. You can declare a country a safe country, right? Then you can create a law which allows you to turn around like that. No appeals, nothing. Now, why do I say that? Because Sweden have already done it. Sweden, you know, social democratic, civilised, you know, nice, upright Sweden has done it. And how did they do it? They looked at the international court, which is why this is all funny in the papers this morning. They looked at the international court case law and designed their law around it. And if we just copied Sweden's law, we could guarantee that the European Court of Human Rights wouldn't interfere.
Well, there we go. Maybe we should just copy Sweden then. But while the Home Secretary was outlining the government's plans to tackle the migration crisis, Rishi Sunak has been with Border Force officials in Dover. Now, the Prime Minister is expected to hold a press conference a little bit later today. Timings of that yet to be confirmed. But let's speak to our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, who joins me now from Westminster. Darren, thank you very much. Now, Suella Braverman was pretty clear about it. She seemed to be claiming that 100 million people might be heading directly for Britain unless we change the law.
Yeah, it was a pretty heated, pretty passionate debate in the Commons. The Home Secretary has wanted to deliver this speech for quite a long time. No one's Suella Braverman. She sees this as our key mission as Home Secretary to try and quell the small boat crisis. It's clearly politically very important for the government. Rishi Sunak has made it one of his 5 key tests, if you like, to judge him by the end of this year, Patrick. So in many ways, the government cannot fail on this. And many Conservative MPs are pretty pleased that at least they've got a plan and that they are being pretty tough, and they do think that this will act as a deterrent to those crossing the English Channel. As for the Labour Party, though, they're none too pleased in the sense that they think the rhetoric around this is too harsh, it's too provocative, that it could prove incendiary, but also they simply don't think the practicalities of this going to work. And it must be said that that's actually shared by some of even Conservative MPs too, who are supportive of this. We heard from some of them who are concerned about where these migrants might be detained, concerned about the use of old army bases, for example, and the idea that their local constituents would not like that if it was to go on for a very long period of time. I think the big questions for the government on all of this, though, Patrick, are, in the end, will this genuinely act as a deterrent? If these people are so desperate to get to the UK, will these measures really actually stop them from doing so? And second of all, where are these migrants going to go to? In theory, as you just heard there from the Home Secretary, they're going to go to a third country. Now, the only deal we've got is with Rwanda, and they've already said that they're prepared to take some people if the courts allow it. But we're talking about hundreds of people. 47,000 came here last year. So it's not entirely clear how the government are going to get through that backlog. And this adds to the fact there's already an enormous backlog in the system that the government has failed to clear, having only processed 3% of claims last year.
Yeah, Darren, thank you very, very much. Darren McCaffrey there, our political editor just outside Westminster. Joining me now is Conservative MP for South Thanet. It's Craig McKinley. Craig, thank you. Now, I understand that your seat is, of course, bang on the coalface, as it were, of the migrant crisis into Britain at the moment. Suella Braverman there talking tough. People will, I think, be forgiven for thinking that maybe this is just a bit more hot air. Do you believe her, though, when she says that around 100 million people might be directly on their way to Britain unless we do something now?
Well, and I'm sure we wouldn't get 100 million, but I think the point she was making is that there are 100 or 80 to 100 million displaced people through war, dreadful regimes and everything else, that under any interpretation of 1951 Convention on Refugees could potentially have a claim here should they come here. Now, whichever way you look at it, 100 million people is not an amount of people that the UK or frankly, Western Europe or anywhere else could actually cope with. But I'm very pleased today that Suella has really turned things on their head. I think this is the important thing, is that the Home Secretary will have a duty to remove, and that's really, really instructive, rather than the position that we've been in up to now of people come and then we go through a rather arcane process, a rather poor process, I must say, that we should have been doing much better. 140,000 people still in the queue and processing and long-term in hotels, expensive hotels costing $3 billion a year. So this is a step change, I think. Obviously, will it get through? You've already heard Labour moaning and shouting about it, but then nothing new there.
Look,
I just don't know what they do want from Britain's immigration system. And I expect some in the Lords will have something to say as well. But this is robust stuff. It could work, and I want it to work.
Look, I think everyone wants it to work, absolutely 100%. But when she was asked, really, or offered herself, how on earth this is going to square itself with existing law, the only thing she could muster was that we have some of the best legal minds in the country working on it, which does mean, doesn't it, Craig, that this legislation hasn't actually been written yet.
Well, look at, people always say, oh, this will conflict with international law. Well, international law is rather vague, let's be very honest. The only law that I think is really important is the democratic law that's gone through our House of Commons by its representatives.
But it hasn't been written.
We have the framework for international law. It was the same arguments that those put against Australia, who went up a pretty tough route of making sure boats didn't land and people were returned to Indonesia and elsewhere. They haven't been cast out as international priors, and nor should we. And that was very instructive what David Davis was saying on one of your show earlier on today, that there are many countries that do tougher things, and they're not cast out as international priors. Now, we can have a debate about the rights of Afghanis and everyone else, that 80, 100 million that could potentially have a claim here. But there are certain, what I'd call the low-hanging fruit, and Albania certainly has to be it. I mean, there are many
The concern
countries
that people have about that, absolutely, is about returns agreements, OK? Now, supposedly we've got a returns agreement with Albania. I think anyone with eyes in their head and ears on the side of their head will be able to see that doesn't appear to be working at the moment. We clearly need returns agreements with other countries. We apparently had them with other EU nations, but they weren't working either. So this does only really work, doesn't it, if we get proper returns agreements with other nations. And is that really going to happen?
Well, I believe there is one in place for Nigeria as well. But that's when the Rwanda bit comes in. Yes, I mean, I've been critical of the Rwanda policy because I think it's a bit of an odd tool in the box. But when you're short of tools, you reach for one that might work. Now, let me tell you very plainly, Patrick, and I've discussed it on here before. I've been shouting about it till I'm blue in the face. Every one of these migrants have launched from a French beach. Now, if the French government and the French army have been able to normalise Mali in West Africa, normalise an entire country, the thought that they can't patrol 3 miles plus or minus to Calais, frankly, is a little bit unbelievable. Now, the French...
I think we might have lost Craig there. We'll try to bring him back up. But, look, lots of unanswered questions when it comes to this. I must admit that something that really did stand out to me was when Suella Braverman said that some of the greatest legal minds in the country are currently working on this. It did imply to me that potentially what she was putting forward hadn't yet been written, which I think should be a concern for people. I believe we might be able to bring Craig back in now. Craig, thank you very much. I did get the gist of what you were saying there, and everyone did, so I'll just move it on slightly if that's all right, because let's just say that all of this comes into fruition and it works. The end goal would be to put a cap on the number of refugees that Great Britain accepts on an annual basis. What would you cap that number at?
Well, I mean, at the moment we've got 45,000 irregular last year, probably a few more that were not even detected at all, and many people would go for naught. No, this country's got a very proud tradition of making sure that those in need are provided for. We've done that for centuries. Now, what this whole procedure is trying to do is to find that holy grail of sorting out the genuine migrant from the economic migrant. And who can blame them, giving it a go, money in their pocket. 76% of those who came in last year on boats were young men. This is trying to sort out, in colloquial terms, the wheat from the chaff. And if it can do that, so we can actually identify those properly requiring protection from those who are not, then that's got to be a step forward. But I'll overlay all this, Patrick, to say France is patently a safe country. You should not be risking your life paying people traffickers to come across the channel. That is patent nonsense. And we've got a lunatic system. It can't continue. And this legislation, I hope, long overdue, will solve it, but we've been here before.
It does never cease to amaze me, Craig, when you do see people rocking up in Calais, interviewing people there who are in the jungle or these makeshift camps and saying, oh, you know, they're so desperate to come over here, and then they talk to them about their epic journey across a continent of safe countries. And you do think, well, actually, hang on a minute, you know, the obvious arguments make themselves there. But look, when it comes to the Labour statement in response to what Suella Braverman said, Yvette Cooper made the point that the human trafficking gangs themselves will tell you that they are, a lot of them, based right here in Britain. Could the Conservative Party not be doing more to tackle them and cut the head off the snake?
Well, there's lots. I mean, the Prime Minister at the beginning of the year laid out a number of new measures that didn't need any new legislation that could actually be, as you say, taking the head off the snake. And that is bearing down on underground working. I think we have a particular problem with that, the underground market in the UK, where people are working for cash. I think you have to be blind not to see it on most high streets. There's a hangover from COVID where data was being shared with banks to prevent those who don't have a right to be here from having a bank account. That all went to aside during the COVID period, so another COVID hangover. The fact that we put people in hotels for over a year while they're waiting processing could be a year, 18 months, even more, that is a downside of our own processes. And the mere fact that those in the Home Office who do this processing seem to be not doing very many on a weekly basis. So there's lots we could do for ourselves, but we perhaps do need this legislation to make it that much tougher. I'll come back again to France. Every single one of those getting to the UK have launched from a French beach. And that can be stopped.
And later on in this very show, actually, I'm going to be having a little look at the role of some of the so-called charities that are stationed in the France area. They're certainly not doing anything to stop people coming over here. And if I was a human trafficker, I certainly would be rather happy that there was essentially a large holding pen there under the name of a charity that could allow me to hold people waiting for me to coin it into the tune of millions for them to take a potentially deadly journey across the Channel. And I think that's an area, frankly, as well, that maybe the Conservative Party could be getting involved with. Can I just ask you, Craig, as well, do you think, actually, realistically, Suella Braverman should have stood up, or Rishi Sunak should stand up and say an uncomfortable thing but a true thing, that unless we decide that we're going to ignore some ECHR rulings, like a lot of other countries do, then we're not going to be able to get this off the ground. And so, therefore, that's what we're going to do. And again, I've got some figures here. The UK is pretty good when it comes... It's one of the most disciplined countries under the ECHR. You know, is it about time that we said this is exceptional circumstances? We're going to flout some of these rules and regs set by foreign judges in the dead of night, and we're going to do what we think is best for our own citizens. And if you want to make us international pariahs, then do so. But we don't think you will.
Well, I've got some figures on that. This rather peculiar Rule 39, which is used by the ECHR, this isn't international law. This is an additional piece of jurisprudence that the ECHR has attached to itself without reference to anybody. Now, look at the Rwanda policy last year. People sitting on that plane ready to go, many of us willing it to go. There was a judge in chambers in Strasbourg, name unknown, written submissions only, and that was then overturned, and we're now in the process. It passed.
All right, that was Craig McKinley there. Thank you very, very much. As Conservative MP for South Thanet, Craig McKinley, just reacting, of course, to the latest when it comes to the Conservative Party's decision anyway, their attempts to control the small boats crisis. Right, coming up, ladies and gentlemen, I will tell you why baby boomers think casual sex is more acceptable than ever before. Yes, that's right, baby boomers, at it like rabbits, apparently. You don't want to miss that, do you? And we'll reveal all, for want of a better phrase, in just a couple of minutes.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching. Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236,
and YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Well, a one-night stand, a fling, or even a conquest. There are a number of ways of naming it. Regardless, casual intimacy is often seen as something for the younger generations. But according to a new study, nearly a third of baby boomers now approve of no-strings-attached encounters. Data from the Policy Institute at King's College London show that attitudes on casual sex are changing, with researchers concluding that when it comes to casual intimacy, the social norm has changed, and the boomers have just followed that. Joining me now is Kate McKenzie, who is a love coach and a sex and relationship therapist. Kate, thank you very much. Yes, great to have you on the show. Now, Kate, does it come as a shock to you that baby boomers appear to be, well, not just embracing the norm, but embracing each other?
Not at all, Patrick, not at all. I mean, if you have grown and learned through your life, then one possible benefit is that you might now have more ideas about what you'd like. And you might be better at navigating how to connect with people or how to have a more casual encounter. You might know what your yes and your no is. And as they say, great lovers are made, not born. And often good lovers have cellulite because they know much more about who they are.
Oh, OK, there you go. Well, I've got some facts here, apparently. So in 2009, just 8% of baby boomers who are born between... So baby boomers are people born between 1946 and 1964, apparently. They found casual sex justifiable, so that was 8%. But by 2022, this had jumped to 30%. So there you go. Quite an increase. Why do you think people previously had shunned casual sex? Also, can I ask, what does casual sex really mean? I mean, does it just mean like a one-night stand? Is that what that is?
It could mean all kinds of things, couldn't it? It could mean a play date with someone. It could mean staying the night with someone. It could be having some kind of connection, a date or a flirt at a club. It could mean all kinds of things. And if you look at our society, it's much easier to go on apps now to meet someone. There are many more ways of clubs and meetups to meet different people in different ways. So there's many more options, and older people are accessing that just like younger people.
Do you think that there was a perception, perhaps, that maybe once people hit a certain age that they were, like, out to pasture, and then now people think, well, that's not the case at all. I've still got needs.
It's absolutely got updated, a bit like, as you probably know, that not long ago, if women presenters hit their 40s, it was thought that by 45, they're not going to be employable, but a court case with the BBC changed that, and you're seeing all kinds of women presenters who are over 45 doing all kinds of things. The same with sex. There was a lot of assumptions that people over a certain age, of course they had sex, right? People still do, and they did. But the assumptions in our societal values, I think, have changed, yeah.
Do you think that a lot of people maybe shackled themselves to someone quite early on and maybe had kids and they were with that person for 15, 20 years or something, and then the kids move out and they think, actually, I hate the way you breathe, and they get a divorce, and then after that they have like a, I'm going to say it, a second coming?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And why not? And because there's so much information, we're in the age of information, really, aren't we? You know, there is a lot out there for people to go and do all kinds of things, have a massage, buy sexy underwear. Sex shops are on a high street. Boots sells sex toys. You know, we never had this, 15 years ago, even Boots doing that. So things are much more commonplace, much more available. And there's all kinds of ways to engage. Plus, there's all this stuff with people saying it's not okay to be prejudiced. So that's including ageism. So that's all. It's all changing.
So what would your advice be now to people? Look, I'm not going to name the individual who's in my inbox here because of confidentiality reasons, but this particular lady says that her sexual days have gone and that she prefers a good cup of tea instead. What would you say to her?
Well, that's fair enough.
Oh, okay.
There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, it's all choices. It's whatever you want. But if you felt like you wanted more of a choice, maybe start with thinking about what might be fun. It might be a cup of tea. It might be dressing up. It might be going out on a date. But if she would just like the cup of tea, there's nothing wrong with that. It's really whatever the person wants.
And just one last one, because I think body confidence maybe plays a part in it, potentially, dare I say it, and I'm not trying to be, in any way insulting to anyone here whatsoever. I mean, the dad bod is a thing. I've been rocking the dad bod for a number of years now, much to the annoyance of my fiancée. But of women as well, maybe if they've had a couple of kids and things like that as well, and maybe they feel less confident in their own body. But would you say that maybe people shouldn't feel less confident? They should just embrace it?
Well, the thing is, body confidence, like anything, is something you can work on and start to, the idea if you give some water and some sunlight to a plant, it'll grow. Same with your own body. You can kind of start to treat yourself, whatever size or weight or ability you have, start to be nice to yourself and your body and start to appreciate what you've got. And that's the beautiful thing about some people, is they work with what they've got. That's why some older people are great lovers. They're not expecting themselves. Some older men, they don't have such an easy time with erections, maybe, but some of them learn how to be really great lovers. And that might be a really different lover than someone who can just have quick intercourse in their 20s. It might be really different as people who grow and move in different ways.
It's great stuff, Kate. Thank you very, very much, as ever, Kate. Always a pleasure and enlightening and revealing as well. Kate McKenzie, the love coach and sex and relationship therapist, reacting to the news today that apparently baby boomers are, well, virulent. Anyway, there's lots more still to come. Between now and 5 o'clock, I will discuss the new report that claims missing black and Asian people are less likely to be found by police than white people. It opens up a massive debate, this, for us, doesn't it? It's this old police racism debate. Do you think that's genuine racism, or actually is there more to it? So we'll be finding out about that. And the NHS is under pressure to start using the word woman when they are talking about women. The full story is coming up. Find out why. But first, I'm going to throw you over now to the latest headlines with Polly Middlehurst.
Patrick, thank you. The headlines just after 4:30, the Prime Minister is saying initiatives to tackle illegal migration have started to bear fruit. Visiting a Home Office Joint Control Centre in Dover, Rishi Sunak told staff plans to prevent small boat crossings must serve as a deterrent and need to be implemented on a much larger scale. He was shown a surveillance drone and taken into a vehicle used to track movements at sea. In the Commons, the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, outlined details of the new illegal migration bill.
This bill enables detention of illegal arrivals without bail or judicial review within the first 28 days of detention until they can be removed. It puts a duty on the Home Secretary to remove illegal entrants and will radically narrow the number of challenges and appeals that can suspend removal. Only those under 18, medically unfit to fly, or at a real risk of serious and irreversible harm, an exceedingly high bar, in the country we are removing them to, will be able to delay their removal.
The trial of a man accused of murdering Olivia Pratt-Korbel has heard that she was shot after running downstairs to her mother because she was scared. The 9-year-old died after a gunman fired shots into her home in Liverpool last August. Manchester Crown Court heard the defendant, Thomas Cashman, had been lying in wait for his intended target. He denies murder. And parts of northern England and Scotland have been blanketed in snow today, with temperatures forecast to drop to -15 in some UK regions. More than 4 inches fell in northern Scotland and around 8 inches are forecast for later on this week. A yellow weather warning for snow and ice remains in place for the area, with tonight expected to be the coldest night of the year so far. That's all from me. I'm back in half an hour.
Yes, I've got a lot coming your way. I'm going to tell you what that is, but before that, I'm going to delve into the sometimes terrifying world of my inbox, gbviews@gbnews.uk. I've been asking you what kind of number you would put on the refugee cap that the government wants to implement, and of course we are reacting together to what Suella Braverman had to say in the House of Commons earlier, the latest Tory plan to try to stop what's been going on in the Channel. David says, if France took the migrants straight back from our country, the boats would stop. Well, yes, it would, but they're not going to do that, David, are they? But anyway, Macron might not want to do it, but I'm sure that we could try to force him to. Well, I mean, OK, it's bold, war with France. Pat says, what we need is amnesty from the ECHR. No other country is being invaded the way that we are, and they need to be told we can't afford it any longer. I think it is, Pat, becoming increasingly obvious to a lot of people that a lot of other countries do just ignore the ECHR with a significant more level of regularity than we do. And for those people who say, well, if we pulled out the ECHR, we'd be like Russia and Belarus. Yeah, OK, that might be right in the sense that they're not a part of it. But there are a lot of countries who are members of the ECHR who just ignore it a lot more than we do, and they are not complete and utter total international pariahs. I imagine that the argument could be made, people, of course, would indeed be very angry about it, but that might be something that the Tory party has to grin and bear if it actually wants to get these boats stopped. One more now. Robert says, there is no way the human rights lawyers are going to allow this law and stop their gravy train. Robert, you allude there to the non-stop legal wranglings that seem to take place whenever anyone is scheduled for deportation. And I am inclined to agree with you. The human rights lawyers clearly would not want this to take place, but like I've said earlier, maybe there could be ways around that law. I'm going to squeeze another one in. Chris says, the UK does not care about numbers. The country's master plan agenda, wow, is to flood the labour market with cheap workers. Now, I do take your point there, but that, I think, Chris, would make a bit more sense for me if we allowed the asylum seekers who we've currently got in hotels to work. We're not. So essentially, they are just now taking as a result of the taxpayer and not working. But yes, I do understand the point that you are making. Now, a little bit later on in the show, we will debate whether we should put a cap on those number of refugees to stay in the country. But next, I'm going to discuss a new report that claims people from ethnic minorities go missing for longer than white people and are less likely to be found by police. Is this evidence of racism, or is there more to it? I'm very keen to drill down into this. I'll see you shortly.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview channel 236.
And YouView channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison? I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Dubes and Co.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit off.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Dubes and Co. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
The nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
Is the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching. Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Okay, so welcome back. Now, the charity... Oh, sorry, just quickly, before I go to that, actually, yes, I just need to tell you that we are going to be bringing you a news conference from Rishi Sunak at 5:30, and that is in relation to what we've been talking about for the vast majority of this show, which is, of course, the Tories' latest attempts to stop the small boats crisis. So make sure you stay tuned. That's at 5:30. We'll be bringing you a news conference, hopefully live, including Rishi Sunak. So there we go. Right, moving on. The charity Missing People has published a report suggesting that black and Asian people are less likely to be found by police than their white counterparts. The report also found that black and Asian children are likely to be missing for longer, with black children 7% less likely to be found by police than white children. Well, this poses some interesting questions, doesn't it? Is this another example of entrenched bias in our police system, or does it point to a deeper problem? Joining me now is Mike Neville, who is a former Detective Chief Inspector at Scotland Yard. Mike, thank you very much. Now, a lot of the time when there are big missing person cases, and there are a couple of obvious examples that spring to mind, if the missing person is white, it does sometimes appear to garner more media attention. And I wonder if that's got something to do with it and what you think that's about.
Well, I ran the missing persons unit at Lambeth as a detective inspector, and I have to say that somebody's race was never an issue in all this. And I've looked at the Guardian report, and you've got a differentiation between 14 and 20% over 48 hours. Now, if you look at the long-term missing people in this country, the ones who've absolutely vanished without trace, the Madeleine McCanns, Claudia Lawrence, Andrew Gosden, they're all white. And if we see the recent tragedy in South Wales and obviously with Nicola Bulley up in Lancashire, there were some failings there, and all those people are white. So I do fear that there's a delving into identity politics here, which The Guardian, of course, love to cause division. And I think the police are being unduly criticised here. And of course, if you're missing, it depends whether you want to be found or not. Now, of course, there's some issues of trust and mistrust of the police amongst the black community. So that might be the case. But when you talk about the Asian population, the figures are very much similar to the white population. So I really do think a story's been made out of nothing here.
OK, interesting, because I suppose the implication would be that in our police force, if they're presented with a series of missing persons cases, that they would be actively going out of their way to prioritise missing white people. And you just don't think that exists?
I'm just saying that's absolute nonsense. It's absolute rubbish. People don't operate in that way. The way that somebody would sit there and say, well, look for the white one, not the black one, is absolutely rubbish. There are, of course, failings, and we see failings with black missing people as we do with white missing people. And I'm on here often criticising the police because they fail to detect crime, or they focus on some woke nonsense rather than investigating burglaries, which affect everybody, black, white and Asian. But I have to say here that I can't find criticism of the police. They have messed up on individual cases, but that seems to be just cock-ups and nothing to do with people's race.
Yeah, I mean, look, I've just got some facts and figures here again. So this report found that 20% of incidents related to black children that went on for longer than 48 hours, this is obviously trying to find missing black children, compared with 14% for Asian children, 13% for white children. So as you rightly said there, the difference between Asian and white children is basically nothing, and there is around a 7% increase, of course, when it gets to black children. Do you think that sometimes it's fashionable to try to identify racial issues where maybe they don't exist?
Of course it is, because there's money to be made in it. As we've seen with everything in this world, from COVID to anything, as long as you follow the money. And The Guardian is just causing, I think, terrible tragedies. I've been involved in youth work in inner London for many, many years. And yes, there is some issues with young black men in particular, in regards to crime and regards to trusting in the police. But I don't think that this missing... Again, if you're missing, do you want to be found? And if they've been found after 48 hours, then thank the Lord for that, and everybody's safe. Because if you search Google right now, which I did, show me the long-term missing people who simply vanished in England, they're nearly all white. And so the police are obviously failing in that respect as well, but they're not, because these people may have vanished because of their own choice, or some wicked deed has been done so they can't be found. But yes, the police deserve criticism for many, many things. But on this, I just think it's a game being played by The Guardian.
Interesting stuff. All right, look, thank you very, very much. It's been great to have you on the show as ever. That is, of course, Mike Neville there, who is a former Detective Chief Inspector at Scotland Yard, reacting to a report that came out today anyway, which appeared to suggest that you were much less likely to be found in a shorter period of time if you happen to be a member of an ethnic minority community. He has kind of poured cold water on that somewhat. But we're moving on, because the trial of the man accused of murdering 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Korbel has got underway today. Everyone will remember this case. Olivia was shot inside her home in Liverpool last August. Now, Thomas Cashman is charged with murder. Let's go live to Manchester Crown Court now, where our North West reporter, Sophie Reaper, is. Sophie, thank you. What's the latest, please?
Well, this afternoon, Patrick, the prosecution told the members of the jury exactly what crime scene investigators found that night at Kings Heath Avenue after a shooting had taken place. They were shown images, one of which showed a bullet lodged in the front door of Olivia Pratt-Korbel's home. They also had described to them a shot that went through the front door. It went through Cheryl Korbel's hand and ultimately went through Olivia Pratt-Korbel's chest. That would be the bullet that killed the 9-year-old girl. The jury were also shown images of some of the clothing that was recovered from 2 separate addresses. One was a pair of navy blue tracksuit bottoms. They were found at the house where the prosecution say Thomas Cashman fled to after the incident had taken place. Further 2 items were also recovered from Thomas Cashman's sister's house, matching navy blue tracksuit jacket to those tracksuit bottoms, and and a T-shirt. The prosecution told the court that on the T-shirts, forensic specialists had found Thomas Cashman's blood, and on those tracksuit bottoms, they'd managed to find a small amount of gunshot residue that matched the gunshot residue that was found at the scene of the crime. Finally, the jury were told about the circumstances of Thomas Cashman's arrest all the way back in September of last year. Of course, Thomas Cashman denies all of the charges that he's facing, and that day when he was interviewed, he said, "I've got no involvement at all in any of these crimes that you're putting forward towards me. Nothing whatsoever. I live in the area, brought up in the area. Whatever the reasons, I've been around the area, but I haven't committed no offence." Mr McLaughlin then concluded the opening statements for the prosecution, putting to the jury that it was their responsibility to keep emotion out of it, and instead it was their job to use the evidence that they've been given to determine whether or not the gunman that night was Thomas Cashman. Now, court has concluded for today, but it's going to resume tomorrow morning at approximately 10 a.m, so we're going to be bringing you updates on that as we get them.
Yes, Sophie, thank you very, very much, as always. Sophie Reaper there, our North West reporter, who's outside Manchester Crown Court and will keep us up to date with the latest on that really horrendous case. Right, we're moving on from that now, and Sir Graham Brady, chairman of the powerful 1922 committee of Tory backbenchers, has announced that he will stand down at the next general election. This, I believe, is breaking news. The MP for Altrincham and Sale West in Greater Manchester since 1997... said that he was bringing this fascinating and fulfilling chapter of my life to a close. With me now to react to this development is Olivia Rutley, GBNews' political reporter. So, he's stepping down as what, chairman or an MP?
Stepping down as an MP, won't be standing as an MP in the next election. Obviously, Graham Brady has a sort of mythical reputation in Parliament. He's overseen the demise of 3 prime ministers, and he is the man who gets in those letters of no confidence, which all too often, as we've seen in recent years, herald the departure of that prime minister. So there's always lots of interest around him when a prime minister starts to become a bit unpopular. Yeah. What's really interesting about this is that Graham Brady has a majority of just over 6,000, which is relatively slim, but in normal times you would expect someone with that sort of majority to be able to hold it quite comfortably. Obviously, it feels now as though the Tories are going to be losing seats with majorities of around 6,000, which is quite bad news for the Tories. For example, that Graham Brady's seat is the 75th on Labour's hit list. And if an MP stands down, it tends to mean that they think that their seat is going to go the other way. So really, we can read this as a sort of temperature test of how MPs inside Parliament feel that the next election is going to go. To caveat that, because of the boundary changes, there will be some seats which were Tory which are going to fall to Labour just because of technical changes to the boundaries. But yes, if we read it as a sort of bellwether of what's going on, it's not good news for the Conservatives.
Really, he's 55 years old, so you would imagine he has more than a few years left in him if he decided that he really wanted to do it. Quite damning, this, is it not, for Rishi Sunak or the Tories, in the sense that he got the chairman of the 1922 committee. He's basically saying, I'm off, lads.
Well, I think it's damning in that it suggests that Graham Brady believes, and obviously Graham Brady is a very sound political mind, very respected in the party. Graham Brady clearly believes that the Conservatives are almost definitely believes that the Conservatives are going to lose the next election quite badly. That is almost definitely why he's standing down. He believes his seat is going to go Labour, and he would rather jump before he's pushed, essentially. I think that's the best way to read it. It probably isn't necessarily a sort of vote of no confidence, as it were, in Rishi Sunak himself. It's just
well, it'd be a bit rich if it was, given the way that Boris
decision.
Johnson was ousted and then Liz Truss was ousted and then Rishi Sunak was imposed on many people, and then if Sir Graham Brady decides that he doesn't necessarily want to fight for electoral success, I think people might be quite annoyed about that.
Perhaps, but you can't really blame him with that majority of just 6,000 in the current climate.
Thank you very much, Olivia. Olivia Rutley there, GBNews' political reporter. Just bringing you that breaking news that Sir Graham Brady is going to step down. OK, all right, we're moving on from that now, and we're going to go to, this story, which is around 1,200 NHS staff have called on the health service to reinstate the word woman onto its website. The NHS uses words like you and people instead of woman in advice on subjects like the menopause and childbirth, which is, I think we can all agree, a bit bonkers, really. But a large number of doctors, nurses and health practitioners have now asked for the NHS to make the change back to woman. I'm joined now by Joanna Williams, who's the head of education and culture at the Policy Exchange. Joanna, bring women back.
Absolutely. I think what's really shocking is that the word woman was ever taken off all these websites in the first place. Whoever thought this was a good idea clearly needs to go back to medical school, because they didn't learn anything about basic biology and what it actually means to be female, to be a woman. They also don't know anything about language, because when you're dealing with medical situations, it's actually quite dangerous, I think, to remove the word woman, because it alienates people. I mean, you said that the word woman's been replaced by you and people. I find that actually preferable to other examples I've seen where the word woman's replaced with things like uterus haver or vagina owner, which are incredibly insulting terms. And for people for whom English is not their first language, you might not even realise that this is something that's referring to you.
But isn't it dehumanising? That's the thing. I mean, women are much more than just, I can't believe I'm saying this, uterus havers, aren't they?
Absolutely. It's dehumanising, it's insulting. I mean, for me, the worst one in the examples of these websites that's been picked up is referring to women who have suffered a miscarriage, which is one of the hardest things that a woman can ever go through in her life. And the idea that even off that, the word woman is removed, and it now talks about people who have suffered a miscarriage. I mean, that's just insulting in the extreme, that anybody sat there and thought that this was a good idea.
But that's the point, That's the point, sorry, because when you look at, woke culture or whatever the heck this is, infiltrating things like schools and children being brought up with this tosh from the age of about 4. And then you think, well, maybe the medical community, where sound medical biological fact will at least be preserved, would not do stuff like this. But clearly someone who's, I dare say, maybe on 100 grand plus a year, who sits as the diversity czar or whatever they are in the NHS at the taxpayer's expense, has somehow managed to say, well, it's offensive to people if we decide to call them a woman pretty much on their medical records. And that's just been allowed to happen. And, I mean, that, Joanna, I think should be a massive concern to women everywhere. It turns out, Joanna, that maybe, and I hate to say this, it's quite easy to erase women.
Well, absolutely. And given that it's International Women's Day tomorrow, and we'll all be being told to go out and kind of celebrate that, you know, it's just so insulting. But, you know, I do think there is a little bit of a good news story in this as well. And for me, the good news is that 1,000 doctors and nurses have written a letter, have complained about this, and have got on the NHS's case. They've said they're not prepared to put up with this and they want the word woman reinstated. Now, my guess is that even a year ago, that might not have been the case, that might not have happened. And it does seem positive that more people do feel prepared and confident now to be able to speak back and challenge this. So I think you're absolutely right. It should never, ever have happened in the first place. Totally disgusting that it did. But I think it is good that people are challenging it.
There's definitely been a pushback, and I want to know from you what you think has happened, because I think for a significant period of time, people were scared off by words like transphobe or TERF or whatever. And I actually think there's been a bit of a line in the sand drawn for one reason or another, and a lot of women are saying, no, I am a woman and I'm going to stand up for this. Why do you think there's been this shift?
Yeah, I think it's really important to acknowledge that that's taken place. And I think it's thanks to some really brave women who are in the public eye, people like J.K. Rowling, Maya Forstater, Kathleen Stock, Helen Joyce, women who've taken a hell of a lot of abuse on social media. I mean, J.K. Rowling famously has received enough death threats, she says, to be able to paper her entire house, which I'm sure is quite a big house as well. But I think it's thanks to women like that who really, are at risk of undermining the biology of what we're talking about here. Women with balls, I would say, who've really put their neck on the line and really been able to push back. And I think they've opened the space for other people to be able to join them and stick their head above the parapet too. I think too often these woke zealots get away with it because they assume everybody else is going to have moral cowardice and not dare to speak out.
Joanna, thank you very, very much. You certainly will not be silenced. Joanna Williams there, who is the Head of Education and Culture at the Policy Exchange. Women with balls sounds like the next tick box that you're going to have to see on an NHS form. Look, a reminder that at 5:30 I will bring you a news conference live with Rishi Sunak, and that is going to be on the government's new plan to end the migrant crisis. That's bold. But anyway, after the break, we will have a debate on whether the UK government should put a cap on the amount of refugees it lets settle into the country. Why? Well, because they want to. I'll see you in a few.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference. And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Hello everybody, it's Patrick Christys right here on GB News with you for the next hour, and it's going to be a big hour because earlier on today we heard live from Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary in the House of Commons. She outlined, even easy for me to say, the Tory party's latest plan to stop the small boats crisis. Essentially it means they want to deport more people and put a cap on the number of refugees, but massive questions, and they are going to be answered hopefully by this man, Rishi Sunak, who is going to give a press conference live right here on GB News very, very shortly, in about half an hour's time. We're also going to be hearing from a former health secretary as well, who basically is slamming Matt Hancock. Why? Well, because he's accused of holding disabled children to ransom in order to get MPs to vote for his lockdowns. All of that coming your way and much, much more. Make sure that you stay tuned to me, Patrick Christys, right here on GB News. Get those emails coming in, ladies and gents, thick and fast. GBviews at gbnews.uk. I have been asking you throughout the course of the show, if we do put a cap on the amount of refugees allowed into Britain every single year, what should that number be? GBviews at gbnews.uk. But right now, it's your headlines with Polly Middlehurst.
Patrick, thank you, and good evening to you. Our top story on GB News tonight. The Prime Minister says initiatives to tackle illegal migration have started to bear fruit. Visiting a Home Office Joint Control Centre in Dover today, Rishi Sunak told staff plans to prevent small boat crossings must serve as a deterrent and need to be implemented on a larger scale. He was shown a surveillance drone and taken to a monitoring vehicle used to track movements at sea. And in the House of Commons today, the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, outlined details of the new illegal migration bill.
This bill enables detention of illegal arrivals without bail or judicial review within the first 28 days of detention until they can be removed. It puts a duty on the Home Secretary to remove illegal entrants and will radically narrow the number of challenges and appeals that can suspend removal. Only those under 18, medically unfit to fly, or at a real risk of serious and irreversible harm, an exceedingly high bar in the country we are removing them to, will be able to delay their removal. Any other claims will be heard remotely after removal.
The chairman of the 1922 committee has announced he'll stand down at the next election. Sir Graham Brady has been the Conservative MP for Altrincham and Sale West since 1997. In a statement, he said, "Representing my hometown in the House of Commons has been an immense privilege for which I will always be grateful." He promised to continue campaigning locally and nationally for the return of a Conservative government. Now, in other news today, the trial of the man accused of murdering Olivia Pratt-Korbel has been told she was shot after running downstairs to her mother because she was scared. 9-year-old Olivia died after a gunman fired into her home in Liverpool last August. Manchester Crown Court heard the defendant, Thomas Cashman, had been lying in wait for his intended target on the evening of the shooting. He denies murder. The gender pay gap in the UK has widened, with men now paid 14.4% more than women. The accountancy firm PwC's report puts the increase down to a sharp rise in childcare costs, which has priced many women out of the workplace altogether. It's also warned at the rate the pay gap is closing, it'll now take more than 50 years to reach gender pay parity. Thousands of UK travellers have been hit by the disruption caused by a general strike in France. Dozens of flights and trains have had to be cancelled and ferries have been delayed. French workers are walking out in protest at President Macron's plan to raise the pension age in the country from 62 to 64. And here in the UK, Cancer Research estimates around 75,000 GP appointments would be freed up every month if people stopped smoking in England. The charity says smoking remains the biggest cause of cancer-related deaths and is urging the government to do more to prevent young people from picking up the habit and to help current smokers quit. But Simon Clark, director of the smokers group Forest, asked where the line would be drawn.
Smoking-related issues tend to be multifactorial. In other words, they can be caused by a whole range of issues that may have nothing whatsoever to do with their smoking. I mean, there's obviously another group of people, of which I'm a member, which are people who are obese. So is the next step going to be to try and end obesity so that we save thousands more GP appointments?
Weather now, and parts of northern England and Scotland have been hit by a sudden cold snap, with temperatures forecast to drop to -15 in some regions. More than 4 inches of snow have fallen in northern Scotland, and around 8 inches are forecast for later this week. A yellow weather warning for snow and ice remains in place, with tonight expected to be the coldest night of the year so far, and it's March. Now, the King and Queen Consort have been in Colchester today to celebrate its new city status. It was awarded the title during the Queen's Platinum Jubilee celebrations last year. The couple visited the city's zoo and castle, as well as Colchester Library, where they joined charities Age UK and the Silver Line for tea with local volunteers. That's it from me. I'm back in half an hour.
OK, ladies and gents, lots to get through this hour, but we start with our top story today. And, of course, Suella Braverman has unveiled plans to detain almost all asylum seekers who arrive on small boats before deporting them to a safe third country. Now, the Home Secretary told MPs that it would betray British voters not to tackle the waves of illegal migrants breaching our borders. Speaking in the House of Commons, she outlined the scale of the problem, reiterating that they will not stop coming until the world knows they will be detained and sent back indefinitely.
Let's be clear, they are coming here. We've seen a 500% increase in small boats crossings in 2 years. And this, Mr. Speaker, is the crucial point of this bill. They will not stop coming here until the world knows that if you enter Britain illegally, you will be detained and swiftly removed. Removed back to your country if it's safe, or to a safe country, a safe third country like Rwanda. And that is precisely what this bill will do. That is how we will stop the boats.
Well, it's worthwhile noting that she also said that she believed that around 100 million people could be eligible to come to the UK under the current rules and regs that we have, which is a shockingly large number. And also worth noting that in about 20 minutes' time, we're going to be going live to a news conference with the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, who we imagine is going to elaborate a little bit more on what Suella Braverman said there in that clip. But this new bill also gives the government the power to set an annual cap on the number of refugees accepted into the country, with local authorities currently being consulted on how many numbers they can take. So, should we cap the number of refugees we allow into the UK, or will it do more to harm than good? Joining me now is the Director of the Centre for Migration and Economic Prosperity. It's Stephen Wolfe. I am also joined by independent statistician and political commentator Jamie Jenkins. Thank you very much, both of you. Stephen, do you just talk to me about this? And do you think we should have a cap on the amount of refugees we take every year?
I think it's really a reasonable thing to do is suggest that we do have a cap. We should have a cap on lots of things, really, because, as you saw very clearly in that clip from Suella Braverman, the recognition that the numbers of people coming in claiming asylum, both illegal and genuine, are huge. And we're spending £7 million a day on housing, £10 billion for a 4-year contract, and over the course of the year, £8 billion is our estimates of what it costs the UK Exchequer to cover immigration and asylum in this country. So holding a cap is a good idea. And let me just say about today, Suella Braverman and Rishi Sunak have managed to achieve something that many Home Secretaries and Prime Ministers haven't done, which is use legislation to sideswipe those in the immigration legal industry. It's a positive day for them. There's plenty in this to be challenged, but I think lots of it will find it very difficult for those challenging them. And also, it's an incredibly bad day for the people smugglers who will see their model being smashed today.
OK, well, that's a positive take on the situation. I'm going to get you to elaborate on that in just a matter of moments, but I'll bring Jamie in now. Jamie Jenkins, independent statistician and political commentator. Do you think we should put a cap on the number of refugees that we welcome into Britain?
Yeah, good afternoon, Patrick. So I think what Stephen's saying there is pretty much spot on in terms of the refugee part of things, because remember, why do we need immigration coming into the country at all? Well, if you look at the population projections for the next, say, 20 years, partly because we're having fewer births, so the total fertility rate is under 2, so we're not having enough births to replace people who will die. We'll actually lose 1 million people in the population by 2040. So you need kind of more wider immigration, which is what you would class as the kind of the more legal immigration, to ensure you've got enough people of the working age population at the moment because of the fertility kind of decline over the last 10 or 20 years. So you need some numbers there. But the challenge with the kind of the refugees, Patrick, is that they can't come in when they work. They cost an absolute fortune because they can't contribute to the economy. And I think Stephen's quoted like £7 million a day. The numbers I'm looking at is probably closer to £10 million a day overall. And you can't continue with this kind of huge bill of, say, £3.5 billion a year. So I think a cap on refugees is important, but you've got to look at the more wider immigration and kind of birth kind of policy for the country over the next 10 or 20 years, because that's just as critical as sorting this out.
OK, all right. Now, Stephen, I understand that, bear in mind, we're about to hear from Rishi Sunak supposedly in about 20 minutes' time at a news conference there. And a lot of the question marks about this were, well, hang on a minute, is any of this actually going to be legal. And Stephen, you might have a little bit of insight for us.
Yeah, I talk to people in the Home Office. They've been giving briefings out to the press and other people over the course of the day. And what is very clear to me is three significant elements. The first of those is the legal right on the Home Secretary to actually have these provisions in place to remove illegal migrants. That's crucial because that's the first time that's ever been done. And it forces the Home Office and the government to be able to ensure they have policies and procedures to remove them. Secondly, they recognise that there will be legal challenges, but they put a really high bar. They're saying that you can still claim asylum, but it doesn't have to be in this country. You can take them to Rwanda. And what is very clear to us, and what they make very clear to us, is that, yes, at the moment, whilst this is going through Parliament, you will hear from them in the future other deals in the pipeline, but they can't tell us which countries and where. And thirdly, what's really crucial about this is the way that they've really superbly been able to use the law to prevent the modern slavery laws, the European Courts of Human Rights, and still enable us to be within them, yet prevent people from being able to use them in the first-tier tribunal, which is crucial. So they've done this brilliantly, and I would say that looking through this is very positive. There will be still some issues. I'm certain that those involved in the other side of the argument will challenge, but I think there's a lot of positives here, and I'm from one who's been monitoring this for many, many years.
Just to clarify a bit on that, Stephen, before I go back to Jamie. So is there something along the lines, if I've heard that correctly, that they will still be able to say to the courts, we are offering these people asylum, just not here?
That's correct. So you don't have to offer them the asylum process in the UK. They're saying you can take them, as you saw with Suella Braverman, in Rwanda. But I believe that there will be other countries that they can take them to. Secondly, there's a high bar of got to be like severe reasons of why you'll want to stay here. For example, health. But as we know, 80% roughly of all of them are coming over are young men, so they're fit and healthy. So they will no longer be able to comply with Section 8 of the Human Rights Act or ECHR. So again, they're clamping down on that, and they'll be clamping down on family requirements too. So they're going to minimise the number of people who could generally claim asylum here within the 28 days.
Well, that is fascinating. Jamie, just going to go back to you now. Do you think that more British people should be looking at the wider picture, such as population growth and birth rates, from what you were saying, and essentially we should be there saying refugees welcome because we need more births? Is that right?
Well, no, I'd probably say what you've got is because the fertility rate is kind of, and remember that migration policy of the last 20 years will have an impact there, Patrick, because we've had such an influx of migration over the last 20 years. That puts a huge demand on services. We've seen house prices go up. So the reason some families are having fewer children now, which you do need the children to come kind of through the system to pay for the pensioners because we're an aging population as well. So past migration has an impact on the number of children people have. So it kind of perpetuates the problem, but we do need to kind of open our eyes in terms of our overall demographic policy in this country, because the government's figures themselves say that to maintain the percentage of the working population, we're going to need 200,000 migrants over the next kind of 20 years per year, and that's quite a large number. That's going to put
just ask Jamie
on to social services.
I'm just going to ask you to delve into that a bit more for me, because I suspect that one of the reasons why people aren't having as many children as perhaps we could or should is because the living conditions aren't necessarily great, getting on the housing ladder a lot later. Maybe they just feel that there aren't the public services equipped to deal with the people who are already here in terms of school places, etc. And maybe mass immigration has had a part to play in that. So how would introducing even more people to that situation make it any better?
Well, that's the kind of the short-term solution. A long-term solution, obviously, Patrick, is to try and get kind of the birth rate back up. But you hit the nail on the head there, that because of the past 10, 20 years of migration having such a big impact on the kind of wider demographics, the reason people are having children a lot later, actually, now, Patrick, is because of house prices. People aren't cohabiting with a partner until much later, which obviously reduces the number of children you may have as well. So the government really needs to get a grip on this. This is a really important issue, stopping the small boats. My big concern, I think, with this policy, Patrick, is, we're talking potentially well over 60, 70, 80,000 potentially this year if they don't get a grip on it. We've got a huge backlog of 160,000 in the system, and there's no way a third country is going to take all of these. So that's going to be, the proof's going to be in the pudding in terms of what they can actually do when they get some new laws in place, I think.
OK, great stuff. Stephen, I'll just give the final word on this to you, just specifically because I know that you've had a bit of insight earlier on as to some of the government's plans here. So just run us through why you are happy about this, because people have been a bit doom and gloom about it. They're saying it's a lot of hot air, but you are quite content with what you've heard.
Yes, I've been critical of the government over the past 3 or 4 years on this policy, but what it does do today is by saying to those people who get into a boat that from the 7th of March, when you arrive on our shores, you'll no longer be able to claim asylum here, and if you're removed, you can be removed to a different country for assessment. And if you fail, you will never be able to have the right to come back. Now, look at that as an issue for a people smuggler who, over the past 3 or 4 years, has said, as soon as you get to the UK, you'll be able to get into a house, you'll go to a hotel, you'll get healthcare, education. That model has gone. And the only way that it will be preserved is if those who support as many of those asylum seekers and channel boat people coming over win in the courts. And why it's important, the second case, is that the legal teams of the Home Office have worked really hard to narrow down the opportunities to make claims in the courts. They've reduced the number of opportunities for using different issues such as people smuggling and trafficking, and also the ECHR and HR, Human Rights Act, and that's positive. And both of those together with future policies that we'll see coming through, which is greater removals and detention, numbers of planes that are going to come out, places that they're going to be detained at, and I believe greater numbers of countries that will take more and more people. I think that's going to be very positive. And Rishi Sunak will win in the polls, certainly in the north, if he manages to achieve this before the summer.
Well, we're going to be hearing live from Rishi Sunak, I understand it, in about 10 minutes' time. Both of you, thank you very, very much.
Pleasure.
That was, of course, the Director of the Centre for Migration and Economic Prosperity, Stephen Wolfe, and the independent statistician and political commentator, Jamie Jenkins, there, just whizzing you through all of that. OK, now, look, after the break, a former health secretary gives his verdict on the latest leaked messages from Hancock. And I will ask, how often do ministers really bully MPs into voting how they want them to? Make sure that you stay tuned, because remember, in a matter of moments, we will bring you, there's the empty plinth, people, a news conference with Rishi Sunak, and he's questioned about the government's plans to tackle the migrant crisis. We gave you a cracking preview of it there. I'll be back in a tick with more.
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion, and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christys, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Lawrence Fox, on GB News. Frank, fun, fearless, and sometimes serious. Much as I love a Friday night punch-up, what I really want is a battle of ideas. I want to look at things differently. I want to hear different voices and engage with your unique experiences. Every Friday at 7 p.m. on GB News.
You a news conference with Rishi Sunak from 5:30. He's going to be talking about the government's plans to tackle the migrant crisis. Big, new, bold plans, supposedly. So we'll bring that to you live. But I think we've got time to sneak in a little bit of something else before then, because Matt Hancock's leaked WhatsApp messages, I know, OK, people are a bit fatigued by this, but this actually is fascinating because Conservative MP James Daly, so he's Bury North MP, Red Wolsey, says that he's appalled and disgusted by the latest revelations in a series of tweets. And it's strongly suggested that Hancock discussed withholding funding for a learning disability centre in Daly's constituency of Bury North to pressure him to not rebel against the coronavirus restrictions. Sir Jake Berry, whose son is differently abled, described the disclosure as an absolute disgrace and called for Mr Hancock to be hauled before the Commons for questioning. It's worth noting that James Daly did vote against what Matt Hancock wanted him to vote for, and that particular centre for children with learning difficulties has still not been built. But Stephen Dorrell joins me now. He's a former health secretary, so he's double relevant in this case, because I want to know, really, first and foremost, whether or not you would have done anything like this, although I doubt you'd tell me if you did. But also, how commonplace is stuff like this? If this is true, this is bully boy tactics of the highest order, trying to strong-arm an MP into voting for you, and potentially using disabled kids as the bargaining chip.
Well, I agree with every word of that. Is it true that whips and ministers apply pressure to MPs to support government policy when MPs are reluctant? Of course it's true, and that's a persuasion process. But it ought to be a persuasion process with very clear limits. And I think the key issue that comes out of this case with James Daly is actually the same issue as comes out of quite a lot of the rest of these Hancock WhatsApp messages. There's inadequate process. The government ought to be, ministers and whips will apply pressure to MPs to support them. But that should be independent of the allocation of public resources to deliver public services. And there should be proper process around that, which is enforced by the civil service.
Have you ever seen, in your time as a politician, anyone say to an MP, I will not build a facility for disabled children if you don't vote for what I want you to vote for?
No.
Have you ever seen anything remotely like that?
Look, in fairness, I don't actually think this threat that was discussed in the WhatsApp messages, from what I understand, was never actually delivered. I believe James Daly says he never knew this was promised, so it could hardly be withdrawn if it hadn't been promised. That's not really the point, is it?
No.
The point is that it was being speculated that this was a legitimate use of ministerial power. And it plainly is not.
No, exactly. It does raise serious questions, I think, about Matt Hancock as a bloke. Now, from what we've seen in these WhatsApp messages, Matt Hancock does say they're selective, etc. I will be reading a statement from Matt Hancock a little bit later on, so there's that. But it would appear that he didn't really do everything he could to preserve lives of elderly people in care homes. It would appear that he didn't do everything he could to promote children's education. It would appear that he didn't particularly do everything he could to actually preserve civil liberties and freedoms, and the advice of the scientists there. If on top of that now he was willing to allow disabled children in Bury North to suffer, in a sense, I mean, at what point do you start to question whether or not he's quite evil?
Well, I don't believe Matt Hancock is an evil man. And there comes you've asked me a question about the principles at stake here, and I've told you what I think is the right answer on the principles, which is that ministers and whips will seek to persuade MPs to support them, but there should be limits to that, and the allocation of public resources should be governed by proper government process. That, I think, those are the principles that are involved. But if you're inviting me to join a kind of witch hunt on Matt Hancock as an evil man, I'm going to say no, I don't subscribe to that. I think there are some very unwise throwaway lines in these WhatsApp messages. I think they reveal inadequate process, but I don't believe they reveal an evil man.
Yes, OK. Now, look, the goings-on behind the scenes and the games of human chess that are played in politics are the stuff of legend. Everyone's seen things like the thick of it, and everyone's aware of various different politicians' diaries, etc. It will come as no shock to anyone that sometimes underhand tactics are used. But in your view, if this has happened, and if the Centre for Children with Learning Disabilities was not built in Bury North as a result of James Daly not voting, whether he knew it or not voting for this, do you think that crosses a line?
Yes, I do think it crosses a line, but if a decision was made to undermine the quality of public services because an MP cast a vote one way rather than another, that's not a legitimate use of ministerial discretion. But I don't think there's any evidence at all that actually happened in this case.
OK, Stephen, look, thank you very much. I always appreciate your insight. Stephen Dorrell there, former House Secretary. Going to read Matt Hancock's spokesperson's statement now, which says, as we've repeatedly seen this last week, it is completely wrong to take this entirely partial account and write it up as fact. What's being accused here never happened. And that, I think we can all agree, is definitely that. Right, I'm going to delve into my inbox now because, like I've said, very shortly, in fact, just in a matter of moments, we are hoping to take Rishi Sunak, our Prime Minister, live at a big news conference, and he's going to elaborate, as we understand it, he's going to elaborate on what Suella Braverman had to say in the House of Commons earlier. The government is launching, yet again, another big solution to the migrant crisis, and it essentially centres around being able to deport more people and then capping the number of refugees we accept. Interesting from what we heard from Stephen Wolfe earlier on there, who has an insight from Home Office sources about how they think they might get around some of the legal ramifications to what they want to do. There were massive question marks as to, OK, if you want to do all of these things, like deport more people and maybe put a cap on refugees, legally, as long as we're a member of the ECHR, oh, well, you're not going to be able to do it. Well, we're hearing that they might have found the loophole, which is that we are still technically going to be offering people asylum, but that asylum is just not going to be in this country. Could that be what the big legal boffins that Suella Braverman was alluding to had to say earlier? I have been asking you, of course, whether or not you would put a cap on refugees entering this country, and lots of you have been responding. gbviews@gbnews.uk. David thinks there should be a 95% cap on people coming over here. I don't know whether or not that's a 95% reduction, but there we go. Also, Christine has said, I've been listening intensely to your programme today. Thank you very much, Christine. I can only apologise. And have heard what's going to happen to illegal immigrants that are already here. Have not heard what's going to happen to illegal immigrants that are already here. Yes, Christine, they're concerned, as I think we all are, that there might be some kind of amnesty. So thank you very much for all of your emails. But before we go to Rishi Sunak, who is supposedly going to take to that plinth at any moment in time, I am joined by Henry Bolton, who is, of course, an expert when it comes to all things border security. Henry, thank you very much. Just preview it a little bit for me, what you're expecting Rishi Sunak to say in just a matter of minutes.
Well, I think he's going to say much the same that Suella Braverman has said in the House of Commons today. But I think he's going to add, you know, this is one of my 5 promises, and he's going to emphasise that. I think he feels confident that this is going to move forward. I think he wants to also probably move the agenda a little bit away from scrutiny of his agreement with the European Union. He said, generally, I have some serious reservations, but generally the response to him has been
we're going
positive.
now, sorry, Henry, we're going to Downing Street right now, where we can listen to Rishi Sunak, I believe, discussing the latest when it comes to his plans to tackle the migrant crisis. Let's take it.
We should decide who comes here and not criminal gangs. Now, the first step is understanding the nature and scale of what we are dealing with. The number of people entering the UK illegally in small boats has more than quadrupled in just the last 2 years. Those illegally crossing the Channel are not directly fleeing a war-torn country, or persecution, or an imminent threat to life. They have travelled through safe European countries. They are paying people smugglers huge sums to make this dangerous and sometimes tragic journey. Now, the reason that criminal gangs continue to bring small boats over here is because they know that our system can be exploited. That once here, illegal migrants can make a multitude of asylum, modern slavery, and spurious human rights claims to frustrate their removal. And the risk remains that those individuals just disappear into the black economy. Now that is the reality we must deal with. And with 100 million people displaced around the world, if we do not deal with it now, the situation will just get worse and worse. People must know that if they come here illegally, it will result in their detention and swift removal. Once this happens, and they know it will happen, they will not come and the boats will stop. That is why today we are introducing legislation to make clear that if you come here illegally, you can't claim asylum, you can't benefit from our modern slavery protections, you can't make spurious human rights claims, and you can't stay. We will detain those who come here illegally and then remove them in weeks, either to their own country if it is safe to do so, or to a safe third country like Rwanda. And once you are removed, you will be banned, as you are in America and Australia, from ever re-entering our country. This is how we will break the business model of the people smugglers. And this is how we will take back control of our borders. Now, this bill provides the legal framework needed to deliver this in a way that no other legislation has done before. This is tough, but it is necessary and it is fair. And this legislation will be retrospective. If you come on a small boat today, the measures in this bill will apply to you. And this is just part of what we are doing. I've always been clear that this is a complex problem that can't be solved overnight and will require us to use every tool at our disposal. That is why I've already secured the largest ever small boats deal with France, and patrols on French beaches are already up 40%. I also promised progress on enforcement, and we've increased raids on illegal working by 50%. I've also negotiated a new deal with Albania, which accounted for a third of all small boats arrivals. And that's already delivering. We've returned 500 illegal migrants to Albania, and we are seeing far fewer come as a result. This shows that there is nothing inevitable about illegal migration. Deterrence works, and with will and determination, the government can get on top of it, and we will. Now, this will always be a compassionate and generous country. It is something that we're all rightly proud of. Just look at how we've welcomed Ukrainians and Syrians from refugee camps and embraced Hong Kongers fleeing the Chinese clampdown. But the current situation is neither moral nor sustainable. It cannot go on. It's completely unfair on the British people who have opened their homes to genuine refugees, but are now having to spend nearly £6 million a day to put up illegal migrants in hotels. It's unfair on the people who come to this country legally to see others skipping the queue. And it's devastatingly unfair on those who most need our help, but can't get it as our asylum system is being overwhelmed by those travelling illegally across the Channel. If we can't stop the boats, our ability to help genuine refugees in future will be constrained. Full control of our borders will allow us to decide who to help and to provide safe and legal routes for those most in need. Now, I understand there will be debate about the toughness of these measures. All I can say is, we have tried it every other way and it has not worked. So I say again, my policy is very simple. It is this country and your government who should decide who comes here, not criminal gangs. And I will do whatever is necessary to achieve that. Thank you. We'll take some questions from the media. If we could start with the BBC.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Chris Mason, BBC News. If by the time of the next general election you haven't stopped the boats, will you have failed?
Thanks, Chris. So look, I wouldn't be standing here if I didn't think that I could deliver on this promise. At the beginning of the year, I stood up in front of the British people, made 5 promises, and one of them was to stop the boats. And since I've had this job, I've spent a lot of time thinking long and hard about how to solve this problem. And I'm confident that the bill we're introducing today will help us do that. It will mean that for the first time, we will have a system whereby if people come here illegally, they won't be able to stay, they'll be detained and they'll be swiftly removed. And as we deliver on that, people will see that there is no point in coming here. We will have that deterrence effect. But I've also been clear throughout that this is a complicated problem, right? There is no one silver bullet. And the legislation, of course, it's really important, and that's why today is important, but it's just one of the many things we're doing. We need to cooperate with our allies, particularly the French, which is why the deal that the Home Secretary and I worked on at the end of last year is so important, and we hope to continue deepening and strengthening our cooperation with the French and other European allies. It's why the deal we announced with Albania is so important. And I think it's just pause on that for a second. Albania accounted for around a third of our illegal migrants last year. But because of the steps that we've put in place, the new deal that we've announced, what we're seeing now is that we're returning hundreds of people back to Albania, and we're seeing the numbers come down considerably. So that shows to me that if we get this right, it will make a difference. Now, we're in the early stages of it, but we've given it long, hard thought. And, I said at the beginning of the year that, I only promise what I believe I can deliver, and I will absolutely deliver on what I promise, and that's what we're going to do today.
That's not the same as stopping them.
Yeah, but all of these things play their part. It's that no one thing is the answer to this question, right? And that is the point. The legislation is absolutely critical. There is no way to stop the boats without this legislation. But this legislation on its own won't do it. That's why we need all the other things that I've talked about as well. All of those things will help us achieve that goal of stopping the boats. But as I said, I promise what I can deliver, and I will deliver what I promise. And that's what we said we would do. That's what we will do. Right, next we've got ITV.
Prime Minister, you talked about the importance of swift removal. More than 2/3 of asylum seekers don't come from Albania. How is it compatible with the British traditions of humanity and compassion that you are criminalising, incarcerating, potentially forcing statelessness, homelessness, destitution on asylum seekers, many of whom are, as you accept, vulnerable and traumatised, before you have in place agreements with third countries to which you could move in a swift way, in your words, those asylum seekers?
This is a country that has always been open, welcoming, compassionate and generous to those in need. Just in the last few years, since 2015, we've welcomed almost 500,000 people to this country. 500,000 from Ukraine, from Syria, from Afghanistan, from Hong Kong. That's our record. That's our compassion. And everyone should be incredibly proud of that. I am. But what is not compassionate is to allow the current situation to persist. There is nothing compassionate about allowing vulnerable people to perish in the Channel. We had a stark reminder of that just a few weeks ago off the coast of Italy when over 50 people died, including children. Right? People being exploited by criminal gangs and smugglers. I was just at Dover earlier today talking to the teams that have to deal with this on the ground, as the Home Secretary and the Immigration Minister see almost every week. There's nothing compassionate about that situation persisting, and there's nothing compassionate or fair about us not being able to help the truly most vulnerable people around the world, because our system is being overwhelmed by those who are jumping the queue and coming here illegally. And they are not the most vulnerable. They are travelling through multiple safe European countries. They are paying people thousands of pounds to get here. So look, I want to move to a system where we break that cycle, we deter people from coming here illegally, jumping the queue, and actually we as a country can then make sure that we decide who we bring here, how many, and make sure that we target that compassion, that generosity and support on the world's truly vulnerable people. And that's why the legislation that we're announcing today not only does the things that we need it to do to break the cycle and give us the powers we need to send people back, but it also allows Parliament to set a quota on how many people we would welcome here under safe and legal routes, as we've done so brilliantly in the last few years. I think that's a type of system that would command broad support, right? And I think that's not just the right thing to do, I think it's actually the moral and compassionate thing to do, because the current system is broken and it's not fair on anybody, and the sooner we can put an end to it and focus our support on those who most need it, I think the better off everyone will be.
But if you can't expel them yet, why do you think the small boats will stop?
Well, the legislation is a necessary step on being able to return people either to their own country where it's safe to do so, or to a safe alternative like Rwanda. And I'd say we already are returning people. You mentioned Albania. Albania accounted for 1/3 of all illegal migrants last year because of the deal that we've struck and the new procedures we've put in place. We are now returning hundreds of people back to Albania. And that's right. And that's the right thing to do. We need to focus our resources, focus our generosity and compassion on the world's truly most vulnerable people. That's what I want to do. I think that's what the vast majority of the country wants to do too. At the moment, that's not possible because we're being overwhelmed with people who are jumping the queue, breaking the laws, and that's not right. And that's what we're going to change. Next, Sky.
Thank you, Prime Minister. 5 years ago, the then Home Secretary Sajid Javid said he was going to make this route unviable. Since then, we've seen tens of thousands of people in the last 5 years. Where do you think your predecessors went wrong? Why are you different? And can I also ask, what does success look like to you? Will you be setting targets for where you want the numbers to be in a year's time?
So this is not about dwelling on the past, because the situation has just got far worse. As I said in my remarks earlier, just in the last 2 years, you talked about when Sajid was Home Secretary, so just in the last 2 years, the numbers of people crossing the channel illegally have more than quadrupled, right? That is the scale of what is happening, and they're forecast to get worse. And the other thing, it's not just us, right? So anyone who thinks this is just a UK-specific problem isn't being straight with you. This is happening across Europe, right? Europe last year saw something like 63% increase in the numbers of illegal migrants, one of the highest numbers they've experienced in almost a decade. And that's because globally, this is a challenge. And it's only going to get worse unless we do something novel, that we do something bold to try and stop it. And that's what our legislation today does. Now, success is us stopping the boats. Success is us having a system that people come here illegally are returned back to their own country where it's safe, or an alternative. And if we can get that working, as I'm confident that we will be able to, as we already are with Albania, we will see the numbers come down, because people will see that it is not worth their while to risk their lives, to pay gangs thousands of pounds for something that ends up not what they expect. And that is the system that we're going to deliver. Now, we've always said, as I've said to the questions earlier, there's no one silver bullet to this. Right? So not only do we need the legislation to be implemented and make sure that we can implement that as quickly as possible, we also need to cooperate with our allies. We need to make sure that we keep signing returns agreements. We need to step up what we're doing on immigration enforcement, as we are, and raids are increasing dramatically. So those are all the different things that we need to do, and we're going to do all of them. We're firing on all cylinders to grip this problem, and people can judge us on our results. I've only been in this job a few months. We're already making, I think, more progress than we've made in a long time. And as a result of this legislation, I think we now have something that is very powerful. We haven't done anything like this before, and it gives us the tool that we need to implement the system that I described. And we've gone further than anyone's gone before. It's right that we're doing that because the situation has got far worse than it was just 2 years ago, but we're responding appropriately. We're responding with tough measures, but they are responsible, they are proportionate, and crucially, they're fair.
But you're not setting specific targets in terms of the numbers.
Well, I think people will judge us on our results. And as I said, we're already seeing the results. Illegal migration rates up 50% since we announced the proposals to do that with Robert at the end of last year. Already hundreds of people being returned to Albania. we're getting the asylum backlog down as well, down by 6,000 just in the last couple of months since we've improved all the processes there. New deal with the French at the end of last year, hopefully further cooperation to come. We promised new legislation. I'm standing here today with the Home Secretary introducing it. So we are continuing to deliver the things that we said, and I'm highly confident that as we keep moving forward, people will see a big difference on this. Right, next, LBC.
Theo Usher with LBC. Firstly, Prime Minister, you're meeting the French President Emmanuel Macron later this week. Do you accept that in order to be successful with this policy, you are going to need his fulsome cooperation? What are you prepared to offer him in return? And if I may, just very briefly on Sue Gray, do you still have faith in the integrity of her report into Partygate?
Look, on Sue Gray, as you know, the Cabinet Office is reviewing the circumstances of her departure. I'm not going to preempt their findings, so I'm not going to comment further on that situation. With regard to the French, as you heard me say before, there's no one silver bullet to solving this problem. It is a complex problem, and we need to use all the levers, all the tools at our disposal. And a crucial one of those is cooperating with not just the French, but also with our other European allies. So I was really pleased after I became Prime Minister, having spoken to President Macron, we managed to get the Calais group up and running. Suella, Home Secretary, attended that. That's fantastic, because that's not just France, that's other Northern European countries coming together to discuss this issue, the shared challenge that we all face, and how we can work together to solve it. Right, that meeting happened, and actually there's some very tangible things coming out of that about data sharing and cooperation of our enforcement agencies, which is great. Specifically with the French, we announced a new deal, the biggest deal that we've had, for more patrols on beaches, up 40%, significant, and better cooperation and collaboration between our teams. Again, I've just got back from Dover, talking to them about the benefit and the difference of that collaboration works. And I'm very grateful, actually. I put on record my thanks as the Home Secretary. I know she's been over there and spoken to them herself. I'm very grateful to the cooperation and support and collaboration of the French teams on the ground. They work very closely with our teams, and because of the work that they do, they help intercept around about half of all the attempted crossings, and that number varies, and at the moment it's on the way up, which is great news. But that's part of the conversation that we'll be having on Friday, is how can we strengthen and deepen and broaden that cooperation. But this is ultimately a shared challenge, and actually you're seeing across Europe, France is looking at new laws to tighten up their asylum regime. Germany has appointed a special commissioner on asylum. Italy is looking at new laws to talk about how they regulate search and rescue operations in the Mediterranean, because many countries are facing the same challenge. And actually, if we work together, it's going to be easier for us to deal with it, particularly on upstream cooperation of our law enforcement agencies, because the best thing we can do is try and disrupt the gangs right at the beginning at source before people end up arriving here. And that's the kind of work that we can do more of. And hopefully we'll be having that conversation on Friday as well. But I'm very grateful to the teams in France for the support and cooperation that they have given us, because it does make a difference. Right. Who have we got next? GB News.
Tom Harwood at GB News. On the face of the bill, the Home Secretary says that she is unable to make the statement that the provisions of this bill are compatible with the Human Rights Act, which of course incorporated the ECHR into domestic law. Already legions of lawyers are preparing to tackle you over this legislation. Firstly, are you up for the fight? And secondly, what's plan B if they win?
Well, look, of course we're up for the fight, and we'll be standing here if we weren't. But we're confident that we will win. And on the Section 19(1)(b) statement, I think it's really important for everyone to recognise there's absolutely nothing improper or unprecedented about pursuing bills with a 19(1)(b) statement. It absolutely does not mean that the bill is unlawful. We believe that it is lawful, that we are acting in compliance with our international obligations. And we are also meeting our obligations to the British public. to make sure that we have control over their borders and that it is them and their elected representatives who are deciding who comes here. But with regard to Section 19(1)(b), as I say, entirely in line with precedent. In fact, a previous Labour government in 2003 used a Section 19(1)(b) statement as they were passing a piece of legislation. We believe we are acting in compliance with international law, in compliance with the ECHR, and if challenged, as you may well be right, and as we've seen in these matters, we do get challenged. We will fight that hard because we believe that we're doing the right thing and it is compliance with our obligations.
But to be clear, no plan B.
I'd say we are.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen,
confident that we are acting.
We can hear Rishi Sunak there. Tom Harwood, our very own political reporter, did just fire a question at him, and I believe maybe we can still hear that, can we? No, we can't. Right, OK, good stuff. So, look, just to summarise there, Rishi Sunak saying that they've gone further than anyone's gone before and that the lawyers won't need a plan B because plan A is going to work, and he clearly feels as though the delivery of his new plan to stop the migrant crisis is actually going to happen. I am joined by Henry Bolton, who is with me in the studio right now, who's a border security expert. Henry, yes, the delivery here is going to be the key one. He clearly feels as though what he's proposing here to stop the boats and to be able to deport people and to be able to send them to third countries is indeed legal.
I think, actually, Patrick, given all of the raft of legislation and bills and so on that we've seen go before, I think this is the one that is credible. He's done his homework here. Suella Braverman has done her homework. In fact, even on the Albanians, I think it was GBNews that really started pushing the Albanian problem to start with. I think they are listening. That's point number one. Point number two, on the legislation, the big question really is whether or not the pro-immigration, if we can say that, the asylum lawyers are able to get some sort of grip on this. And the areas that they've been focusing on in the past is really centred around two things. One is whether or not we comply with providing appropriate living conditions for people that we're processing. And the second thing is, are we actually processing them? And if there's a problem with either of those things, then they get a grip. Now, this under international law, I'm being fairly broad brush about this, but those two things are important. But it doesn't say where you have to process them, and it doesn't say where you have to provide them accommodation. So
that's the loophole. Well, why hasn't this been done before, though? This is the thing, because Rishi Sunak there, and I think it's fair to say, gave the distinct impression of a man who is well across his brief, actually.
Indeed.
And clearly does actually believe in this. And why wasn't this done before? Do you think it was just that other politicians and prime ministers did not firmly believe in this?
I think they've not been listening. I think, there have been those of us speaking on this channel and elsewhere, and indeed your journalists, your correspondents and others have been saying that this is the sort of approach that needs to be taken. And I think they've finally started listening. And I think that has a lot to do with the character of Suella Braverman anyway. She went into that brief as Secretary of State with this in mind already. So I think that's point number one. Point number two, they have drafted in some serious people, some sort of planning brain power from the Ministry of Defence into the Home Office. And that, I think, has also helped them in terms of sort of trying to work through the issues in a logical, concise manner. So we've got all of that. Now, is it going to work, though? Now, I'll give them 8 out of 10 on this so far. The crucial 2 out of 10 is about the delivery. And when I've helped other countries to do similar work, legislation has always been a crucial part, the review of it and so on, and whether the right powers are there and so on and so forth. But you've got to think about the overall context. And when he's talking borders, and I keep wanting to remind people this, immigration is the upfront and visible issue that concerns everybody, but we've also, all of the cocaine and all of the heroin and 97% of the illegal firearms in this country are imported across our borders. And Patrick, if I may say one final thing, Yvette Cooper in the House of Commons, it was an exercise of the deepest hypocrisy. She was attacking the government for not going after the people smuggling networks. It was the Labour Party under Tony Blair that pulled the plug on our efforts transnationally to destroy and disrupt people smuggling networks. That needs to be brought back in.
Henry Bolton, thank you very much. Border security expert, reacting to what we just heard there from Rishi Sunak, very much live here on GB News. Well, what do you make of that, ladies and gents? Make sure you get your views coming in, gbviews@gbnews.uk. Do you reckon Rishi Sunak has, if he gets that right, just won the next election, or are we massively, massively jumping the gun? Up next, of course, is Jubes & Co. with Michelle Dewberry, who is on a couch over there. Yes, you are. What have you got coming up, or are you not going to tell me?
I'm not reclining and laid back with someone analysing me on said couch. I'm sat up, ready, poised to go. I enjoyed Tom Howard's question then to the Prime Minister. Thought it was very good. I do wonder, though, why has this government not learned anything about not having a plan B in the background? By the way, the police are getting criticised again today. Have you seen that awful crash, which saw 3 young people alongside, people that had passed away for 48 hours. What are the police doing? Many saying that they've got their priorities wrong. Have they? We'll look at that in a few minutes.
All right, Michelle, look, thank you very, very much. Michelle Dewberry there with Jubes & Co. coming your way up next. I will be back on your screens at 9 p.m. as I step into Dan Wootton's hot seat. I will see you at 9.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216,
Freeview Channel 236,
and YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB+ radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes & Co.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit off.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes & Co. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.